My ghostwriter is literally dead. Book 1. Prologue. The Waste of Ink. Silas Thorne did not die of a disease, nor did he die of old age. He died of a profound, catastrophic offence to the English language. It was a damp Tuesday evening in November of 1925. The attic flat in Gloucester was entirely different then. It was a sanctuary of intellect, lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves and smelling richly of pipe tobacco and beeswax. Silas, the esteemed chief critic of the Gloucester Gazette, sat by the fire in his favourite mahogany wingback chair. On his lap rested a newly published copy of a poem that the London literary circles were fawning over. It was called The Waste Land by a Mr. T.S. Eliot. Silas despised it. He despised its fractured structure. He loathed its lack of traditional metre. To Silas, it was not poetry. It was the linguistic equivalent of a man falling down a flight of stairs while carrying a bag of loose cutlery. Indignation hot in his chest, Silas dipped his silver fountain pen into a pot of jet-black ink. He smoothed a fresh sheet of parchment over his writing desk and began to draft the review that would surely end Mr. Eliot's career. To call this fragmented, hysterical drivel poetry is an insult to the very concept of the written word. It is not the wasteland. It is, in fact, the waste of ink. He never finished the sentence. As he crossed the T in waste, a sharp, shooting pain seized his chest. It was an intellectual apoplexy. His heart, simply unable to beat in a world that celebrated such abysmal syntax, exploded. Silas slumped forward, his nose pressing into the wet ink, dead before his pen hit the floor. When Silas opened his eyes next, he was floating 3 inches above the Persian rug. He watched in detached horror as the coroner hauled his body down the narrow stairs. Assuming he was destined for the great library in the sky, where he fully expected to debate Shakespeare and correct Milton's punctuation, Silas attempted to float through the ceiling. He bounced off the plaster with a dull, spectral thud. A cosmic, undeniable truth settled into his ectoplasm. He was tethered. Because he had died mid-critique, the universe had deemed his life's work unfinished. He was bound to this architectural disaster of an attic until a work of equal literary merit was completed within its walls. A minor delay, Silas had told himself in 1925. A true writer will move in, pen a masterpiece, and I shall be on my way by Christmas. He was catastrophically wrong. Decades bled into one another. The mahogany wingback chair was eventually dragged out and replaced by a succession of increasingly terrible furniture. Silas was forced to bear witness to the agonizing decline of Western civilization from the confines of his attic. He watched in helpless horror as the typewriter gave way to the word processor, which gave way to the cellular telephone. He suffered through the invention of text-speak, the tragedy of the exclamation mark epidemic, and the dark, unforgiving era of dial-up internet. For nearly a century, no one wrote a masterpiece. His tenants were a revolving door of university students, terrible amateur poets, and people who use the word literally to describe figurative events. By the year 2024, Silas Thorne had resigned himself to an eternity of damp floorboards and bad grammar. His attic had been stripped of its dignity, reduced to a crooked, drafty box sitting above a noisy pub. Then the door opened, and a 23-year-old girl dragged a deflated beanbag and a giant, circular, glowing light into his domain. The nightmare, it turned out, was only just beginning. Chapter 1. The Ominous Vibes. The Gloucester docks presented a picture of perfect historic tranquility. Beautiful, imposing Victorian warehouses, built of red brick, stood stoically against a perpetually grey English sky. The water of the canal was still and picturesque, reflecting the ancient, judgmental architecture of Gloucester Cathedral that loomed in the background. Yet, this majesty cut abruptly to the grim reality of the high street moments later. The elegance of history vanished, replaced by a blindingly neon vape shop named Cloudy with a Chance of Vape. sitting directly next to a boarded-up charity shop. Outside, a seagull the size of a small dog tore open a bin bag with surgical precision, pulled out a half-eaten kebab, threw its head back, and screamed like a banshee. High above this chaos, in a drafty, crooked attic flat, 23-year-old Ria Khan was trying to ignore the chill. The space was aggressively historic, a polite real estate term that actually implied the flat was drafty, crooked, and incredibly damp. The ceiling sloped so aggressively that anyone over 5'5" was in constant danger of a concussion. Piles of moving boxes, labelled aesthetic stuff, and books I will read eventually, littered the floor. In the centre of the room, standing like an alien totem pole against the peeling floral wallpaper, was a massive ring light. Sitting on a deflated beanbag, Ria wore an oversized hoodie that read "Emotionally Unavailable" in Gothic font. She held an iced matcha latte, shivering despite the fact that she could clearly see her own breath puffing in the freezing air. Swiping to the Glow Goddess filter on her phone to hide her frizzy hair and the tired bags under her eyes, she suddenly looked airbrushed and awake. She cleared her throat, muttering to herself, "Energy up, shoulders back, manifest the audience." She hit record. "Hey girlies, welcome to the new HQ," she chirped, adopting her bright, slightly breathless influencer voice. "It's giving dark academia. It's giving main character energy in a Gothic novel. I've moved to the city of Gloucester to focus on my craft." She forced a bright smile to the lens. No distractions, just vibes and spiders, but aesthetic spiders. A guttural rumble from a lorry outside violently shook the window frames, followed closely by a blaring car alarm in the distance. Ria twitched, but she gritted her teeth, keeping the smile plastered on. "So peaceful," she hissed through her teeth. She tried to take a casual sip of her latte, but the straw missed her mouth entirely, nearly stabbing her in the chin. Recovering smoothly, she continued, "Also, the Wi-Fi is literally a hate crime, and I think I saw a rat wearing a waistcoat earlier. But we move, we adapt, we overcome." She stopped recording, and her manic energy vanished instantly. Stripped of the filter and the performance, she looked incredibly small in the big, cold room. She opened her laptop, which was currently resting on a wooden crate because she hadn't managed to build her desk yet. A blank Word document stared back at her, the cursor blinking endlessly, mocking her. "Okay, Chapter 1, she muttered to herself. The vibes were immaculate. No, too basic. The vibes were ominous." She typed, "The vibes were ominous." She stared at the words for a long moment. "God, I'm a hack," she whispered. Suddenly, the massive ring light flickered with a loud bzzzt. It dimmed for a terrifying second, then surged brighter than before. Ria paused, tapping the plastic stand. "Don't you dare. I got you on Klarna. I have 3 payments left," she warned it. The temperature in the room plummeted. It wasn't a gradual cooling. It was a physical slam of freezing air. Ria gasped as her breath became visible, puffing out of her mouth like thick white smoke. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently as frost began to creep up the side of her plastic cup. With a sharp crack, the plastic split right down the middle, unable to contain the expanding ice. The green matcha liquid stopped swirling, and the straw stood straight up, frozen solid in place. From the dark corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to cling to the damp, peeling wallpaper like tar, a resonant, upper-class and highly judgmental voice boomed. "The vibes were ominous?" the voice demanded. "Is that a sentence or a cry for help?" Ria froze. She slowly picked up her neon-pink vape pen, holding it out in front of her like a can of mace. "Who's there? I have a jagged crystal, and I'm not afraid to manifest pain," she yelled into the dark. The shadows detached from the wall, knitting together and swirling like ink in water until they formed the shape of a man. Silas Thorne stepped out of the gloom. He looked remarkably good for a corpse, though he was entirely monochrome and grayscale, dressed in a sharp 1920s tweed 3-piece suit with a high collar. He eyed her vape pen with deep suspicion. "Put down the glowing stick, child," Silas commanded. "You look ridiculous. And delete that sentence. It is an affront to the English language." Ria blinked rapidly. "Are you the landlord? Mrs. Pigeon said you lived in the basement." "I am Silas Thorne," he announced proudly, Chief Critic of the Gloucester Gazette, 1919 to 1925. He drifted closer, his feet not quite touching the ground. "And I am unfortunately bound to this architectural disaster until someone in this room writes something that doesn't make me want to weep blood." Without breaking stride, Silas walked directly through the beanbag. Ria screamed, scrambling backward until her spine hit the wall. He gestured disgustedly toward her laptop. The vibes were ominous. "Narcissism is not a personality trait, madam. It is a diagnosis." Hyperventilating, Ria dove behind her makeshift kitchen island of crates. Instinctively, she held up her phone and started filming him, her hand shaking uncontrollably. Okay, so this is happening. I'm being haunted," she babbled to the camera. "This is actually great content. Hashtag ghost check, hashtag haunted house, hashtag spooky season." Silas leaned over the crates, peering at the phone screen with a mixture of confusion and disgust. "Who are you speaking to? There is no one there," he asked. "Are you mad? Or just American?" Lowering the phone, Ria stared at him. "You're a ghost. A literal ghost." "Do not use the word literally unless you are physically—" Silas began. Yeah, whatever," Ria interrupted, finding a sudden burst of panicked courage. "Look, Mr. Ghost, I signed a 12-month lease. The deposit was nearly $2,000, so unless you're paying half the council tax, you need to leave." Silas laughed, a dry, dusty sound that resembled old book pages turning. "I can't leave. I died in this chair." He pointed a translucent finger toward a battered ergonomic office chair. "Well, not that monstrosity, a mahogany wingback. I was composing a scathing dismantle of T.S. Eliot. The wasteland? More like the waste of ink. I was mid-sentence when my heart exploded." "You died writing a hate comment?" Ria asked, blinking. "That's actually kind of relatable." "It was criticism. High art," Silas roared, offended. "And I cannot pass over to the Great Library until a work of equal literary merit is completed in this room." He floated over to her laptop, scowling at the screen. "And, judging by your opening sentence, I shall be here until the sun expands and swallows the earth." "Hey, I'm a professional writer," Ria defended herself defensively. "I summarize Reddit threads for YouTube. AITA for eating my boyfriend's mom's ashes. Got 3 million views." Silas looked at her, and a long, painful silence stretched between them. "I have no idea what any of those words mean," he said softly, "but they make me wish for the sweet release of a second death." Unable to take it anymore, Ria bolted. She ran down the narrow, creaky stairs, tripping over a loose carpet runner, and hammered frantically on a door marked "Private" in peeling gold letters. The door swung open to reveal Mrs. Pigeon, a tough, sexagenarian landlady wearing a leopard print dressing gown and smoking a cigarette that was mostly ash. The thumping bass of the pub downstairs bled heavily through the floorboards. "No refunds," Mrs. Pigeon grunted. "There is a man in my flat, a grey man, in tweed," Ria yelled. Mrs. Pigeon was utterly unimpressed. "Oh, you met Silas?" "Yeah. He comes with the place," she replied calmly. "Like the mold in the bathroom, but louder." "You rented me a haunted flat." "It's historic character. Usually charge extra for it," Mrs. Pigeon reasoned. "He's harmless. Just don't split an infinitive in front of him. He throws books." "I can't live with him. He hates my vibes." "Look, love, it's Gloucester. Everywhere's haunted." Mrs. Pigeon sighed. "The cathedral's got monks. The Tesco Express got a Roman centurion in the frozen aisle. You get a posh critic. Could be worse. Could be the plague victim in flat 3B. He leaks." With that, Mrs. Pigeon shut the door firmly, leaving Ria alone in the hallway to the rhythm of the thumping bass. 15 minutes later, Ria sat in a crowded, noisy coffee shop down the street. She had just gotten off a terrible phone call, wincing at the bad news. She hung up, staring grimly at the bank balance on her screen, £14.50. Outside the window, a miserable grey drizzle had started to fall, and she watched the giant seagull from earlier brutally fight a pigeon over a crust of bread. Defeated and soaking wet, she returned to the attic flat that evening. Silas was exactly where she left him, floating cross-legged 3 feet above the floor. He was intently reading the back of a box of Fruit Loops. Natural fruit flavors. A lie, Silas muttered. This tastes of chemical deception. You can eat? Ria asked tiredly. I can consume the essence of things, he replied, and the essence of this is despair. He tossed the box away, and it passed right through his hand, landing on the floor with a hollow thud. Ria threw her bag down and slumped onto the deflated beanbag, staring blankly up at the ceiling. Look, Silas, I can't move out. I'm broke. I spent my savings on this writer's retreat because I need to write a script that matters. Silas lowered himself until he was hovering perfectly at eye level. Matters? You are writing about... what was it? Vibes. I want to write the truth, Ria said, her voice wavering, about how hard it is to be, alive. Now. Silas scoffed. What is hard about now? You have machines that wash your clothes. You have a device that summons food. You have antibiotics. We have impending climate doom, Ria yelled, the stress finally breaking her. We have the housing crisis. We have the crushing weight of perceiving everyone else's highlight reels while rotting in our own mediocrity. Her voice cracked as tears pricked her eyes, and she wiped them away angrily with her wet sleeve. Silas watched her in silence. He tilted his head, his judgmental expression softening just a fraction. Rotting in mediocrity, he repeated thoughtfully. Shut up, she sniffed, wiping her eyes. No, that phrasing. It wasn't terrible, Silas admitted. It was adequate. Ria looked up at him in surprise. You are hysterical, undisciplined, and you dress like a toddler who dressed themselves in the dark, he listed calmly. But you possess self-loathing. Thanks. Self-loathing is the fuel of all great literature, Silas declared, floating over to the desk. Perhaps you are not entirely hopeless. He looked down at the glowing laptop screen. Open the document. Delete the vibes. You're going to help me? Ria asked, wiping her nose. I am going to torment you until you produce art, he promised smoothly. Sit down. Ria hesitated for only a second before standing up and taking her seat at the crates. Now, we begin with structure. And for the love of God, turn off that circular sun lamp. It highlights your pores, Silas commanded. Ria reached out and clicked the ring light off. The room was instantly plunged into shadow, lit only by the pale blue glow of the laptop screen and the faint, spectral shimmer of Silas standing beside her. For the first time all day, Ria smiled just a little bit, and she began to type. Chapter 2. Concussions and Content. The morning air in the attic was thick with the smell of damp plaster and creative desperation. Ria Khan was pacing the uneven floorboards, wearing a matching neon-green spandex activewear set that had, to date, never seen a single moment of physical activity. She was attempting a hamstring stretch, mostly to procrastinate opening her laptop. Silas Thorne floated by the rain-streaked window, staring out at the grey Gloucester sky with profound Victorian melancholy. Okay, pitch meeting? Just me and you, Ria said, clapping her hands together. Let's circle back and touch base. We need a topic. The pilot script was promising but raw. I need a follow-up. Silas turned slowly, his sharp tweed suit completely unrumpled by gravity. I would rather touch a leper, he deadpanned. And why are you dressed like a shrink-wrapped sausage? This is athleisure, Silas, Ria huffed, pulling at the hem of her top. It says I'm ready to run a marathon or nap for 6 hours. It's versatile. We agreed on a drawing room mystery, Silas stated smoothly, floating over to her makeshift crate desk. The case of the poisoned scone. Boring. No one cares about scones unless they're gluten-free and cost £4. I need something visceral. Something local. Something that screams the human condition. Ria stopped pacing and marched over to her bruised mini-fridge. Pinned to the door was a brightly coloured flyer. It depicted a wheel of double Gloucester cheese and a stick figure tumbling violently down a vertical green cliff. She tapped it with a manicured fingernail. The cheese rolling. Silas drifted closer, peering at the flyer through invisible spectacles with absolute disdain. Cooper's Hill? That display of barbarism? It is peasant bowling. Men throwing themselves down a cliff for a dairy product. It is the height of idiocy. It's not idiocy, Silas. It's metaphor, Ria argued, her hands flying enthusiastically. We chase the cheese. The cheese is success. The cheese is love. And the hill is late-stage capitalism breaking our legs. The hill is gravity, you pretender, Silas retorted flatly. I'm doing it. I'm writing a gritty sports drama, Ria insisted. Rocky meets Wallace and Gromit. Silas sighed heavily. To emphasize his absolute displeasure, he slowly passed his translucent hand directly through a half-dead succulent plant sitting on the windowsill. The plant instantly withered, turning a sad, dry brown. If you write about cheese, I shall haunt your Spotify algorithm. I will make every song the laughing policeman. You wouldn't, Ria gasped. Try me, Silas threatened smoothly. Before Ria could defend her playlist, the apartment door swung open. Baz, Ria's 24-year-old social media manager, strolled in. He was wearing a t-shirt that screamed, "Hustle hard" in block letters, though he was currently doing nothing harder than eating a massive Greg's sausage roll, scattering a snowstorm of flaky pastry across the rug. So, the ghost guy, Baz mumbled around a mouthful of pork and sage. Is he here right now? He's sulking in the ceiling, Ria said, without looking up from her screen. He says the Wi-Fi waves make his ectoplasm itchy. Sick. Anyway, this cheese-rolling script is content gold, Baz said, pulling out his phone and a heavy-duty camera gimbal. We should film you doing research, like method writing. Exactly. I need to feel the fear. I need to understand the gradient. Above them, Silas descended from the ceiling, hanging completely upside down like a tweed bat. You need to understand basic grammar. You ended your last paragraph with an emoji of a skull. That is not punctuation. As Silas spoke, the ambient temperature plummeted. Baz jumped, dropping his sausage roll onto his shoe. Whoa! Did the temperature just drop? Or is that the ghost? Baz, this is Silas. Silas, Baz, Ria sighed. Baz is my... lackey? Jester? Village idiot? Silas offered, righting himself in the air. I can't see him, Ria, but I feel incredibly judged. Baz shivered, rubbing his arms. Tell her to abandon this folly, Silas commanded Baz, though the boy couldn't hear him. Cooper's Hill is a place of mud and broken bones. It is not content. He says it's dangerous, Ria translated for Baz, which just proves I have to go. Totally. We'll go to the hill. Get some B-roll. You can stand at the top, look pensive. Voiceover. Why do we fall? Baz pitched. Because you have the balance of a drunk toddler, Silas predicted. I'm going, Ria declared, and you're coming with me, Silas. I need you to critique the atmosphere. I refuse, Silas declared, crossing his arms stubbornly. I am housebound. Ria simply smirked. Mrs. Pigeon said you're bound to me until the masterpiece is done. If I go to the hill, you go to the hill. She unplugged her laptop and shoved it into her canvas tote bag. Instantly, an invisible, glowing blue tether snapped taut, bonding his spiritual essence to her creative instrument. Silas looked horrified at the tote bag. But it's outside. There are people and fresh air and nature. Grab your hat, Casper. We're going to chase some cheese, Ria smiled. Cooper's Hill didn't look like a hill. It looked like a muddy green wall. It was terrifyingly vertical, slick with recent rain. Ria stood at the bottom, looking up at the precipice, feeling incredibly tiny. Baz was already circling her, filming with his iPhone on a gimbal. Okay, looks sad, but also hot. Action, Baz directed. I'm standing at the precipice, Ria whispered into the camera lens, trying to look profound. The cheese is calling. Silas materialized invisibly beside her, holding a spectral handkerchief tightly over his nose. It smells of cow dung and regret. Can we leave? Shh, I'm in the zone, Ria hissed at the empty air. Who are you talking to? Baz asked. The process, Baz, Ria snapped. She pointed up the muddy slope where a few local lads were practicing their tumbles in the dirt. I need to go up there, to see the view from the top. You will die, Silas predicted flatly, and then I will be stuck with two of you. Ignoring him, Ria began the arduous, wheezing climb. When she finally reached the top moments later, she was gasping for air, clinging desperately to a wooden fence post. Silas floated effortlessly beside her, looking entirely bored. Are you quite finished dying? Silas asked. Just catching my breath, Ria wheezed. The air is thin up here. We are 200 feet above sea level. It's not Everest, Silas sighed. Ria looked down. The ground seemed miles away. Okay, I see the metaphor now. It's terrifying. Yes, now, let us go home and write a nice sonnet about daffodils, the ghost pleaded. Suddenly, a cheese official, a burly man in his 60s wearing a high-vis vest, walked past them, pushing a heavy wheelbarrow loaded with massive wheels of double Gloucester cheese. Mind your toes, love, the official grunted. This one's a heavy bugger. The mud was slick. The official lost his footing. The wheelbarrow wobbled violently, tipping entirely to the left. A massive wheel of cheese broke loose, rolling rapidly directly toward Ria. Ria panicked. She stepped back. Her foot found nothing but wet mud. Time seemed to slow down. Silas pinched the bridge of his nose. Oh, dear. Ria tumbled backward. She did not roll gracefully. She flailed like a starfish trapped in a tumble-dryer, a blur of neon green and flying mud. From the bottom of the hill, Baz didn't flinch. He just kept the camera steady and yelled, "Content!" Later that evening, the door to the attic flat burst open. Baz carried Ria into the room. She was covered head to toe in thick, foul-smelling mud, missing one shoe, and her hair looked like a bird's nest that had been struck by lightning. He dumped her unceremoniously onto the deflated beanbag. A massive cloud of dust and dried mud puffed up into the air. Mrs. Pigeon appeared in the doorway, wearing her leopard print dressing gown and holding a bag of frozen oven chips. I heard the thud. Is she dead? If she's dead, I need the room cleared by Tuesday, the landlady demanded. She's alive, just rebooting, Baz assured her. Ria groaned, opening one mud-caked eye. Did I get the cheese? You did not, Silas noted, floating over the beanbag. You did, however, take out a family of 4 and a golden retriever. Mrs. Pigeon unceremoniously dropped the frozen chips onto Ria's forehead. There. That'll stop the swelling. You look like you've gone 12 rounds with a tractor. Mrs. Pigeon, Ria murmured deliriously. I saw God. He looked like a wheel of cheddar. That's the concussion talking, Mrs. Pigeon snorted, or the ketamine from the paramedic. Right, I'm off. Keep the noise down. The football's on. As the landlady left, Baz excitedly reviewed the footage on his phone. Ria, this is viral gold. You look like a rag doll. The comments are already popping off. User CheeseKing99 says, R.I.P. to a real one. I need to write. Ria struggled to sit up, her head swimming. You need to sleep. You have a brain injury, Silas warned. Though, frankly, given your previous work, it might be an improvement. No, the trauma. It's fresh. This is the raw emotion you wanted, Silas. The pain, Ria argued, crawling desperately toward her laptop across the floorboards. She looked like the girl from The Ring, but significantly muddier. Well, that is dedication, Silas admitted, intrigued. Or madness. Very well. Write, child. Bleed onto the page. Ria opened the laptop. Her hands were shaking violently as she typed, click, clack, click, clack. She stopped, tears of exhaustion streaming down her dirty face. It's done. My magnum opus. Silas drifted closer to read the glowing screen. The hill was angry, he read aloud. Like a stepdad who ran out of vape juice. The grass tasted of green. Why is the cheese round? Why are we round? Ouch! Silas stared at her in utter disbelief. Ouch? It's open to interpretation, Ria mumbled. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped face first onto the keyboard, typing an endless string of J, 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 J. And scene, Baz muttered, still filming. The Gloucester Royal Hospital A and E waiting room was a miserable place at night. Ria sat in a plastic chair, finally wearing a stiff foam neck brace. She had been cleaned up slightly, but still had dried mud in her ears. Baz was fast asleep in the chair next to her, his mouth hanging wide open. Silas was hovering near a vending machine, looking deeply confused. Grab bag? Why would one grab the bag? Surely one desires the crisps inside. This signage is baffling, he complained to the empty room. Silas, please, Ria groaned, her voice muffled by the neck brace. My head is throbbing. A tired, overworked nurse in her 40s walked into the waiting area holding a clipboard. Ria Khan? Present, Ria croaked. The nurse looked her up and down. Right, love. Doctor says it's mild concussion and soft tissue damage. You're lucky. Last year a bloke broke his pelvis and his dignity. Her dignity was lost long before she climbed that hill, madam, Silas noted dryly from beside the vending machine. The nurse shivered, rubbing her arms. Ooh, bit of a draft in here. Nurse, can I go home? I have a script to finish, Ria pleaded. Script? You a writer? My nephew writes rap battles. Spit bars, he calls it, the nurse said absent-mindedly. Silas gasped in outrage. Rap battles? Is poetry a combat sport now? Anyway, take these painkillers, don't operate heavy machinery, or sign legal documents, the nurse advised, turning to leave. But she stopped suddenly, shivering again. Silas was staring at her with intense, terrifying focus. Silas, what are you doing? Ria asked nervously. I cannot help it, Silas whispered, his ghostly eyes locking onto the woman. Her grammar, she said, is you all right to a patient earlier. I must correct her. Silas, no. No possessing the NHS, Ria begged. It was too late. Silas swooped across the room, vanishing directly into the nurse's chest. The nurse gasped, dropping her clipboard. Her posture instantly stiffened, becoming rigidly upright. She reached up and adjusted her blue tunic as if it were a three-piece tweed waistcoat. When she spoke, her tired Gloucester accent was completely gone, replaced by Silas's booming, aristocratic, received pronunciation. Ahem! Attention, waiting room denizens! The possessed nurse bellowed. Ria buried her face in her hands. The signage above the triage station reads, Patients must be patients. This is an abomination. It is a homophone error of the highest order, the nurse shouted furiously. A drunk man in the corner looked up, blinking blearily. What? And you, sir. Pull up your pantaloons, the nurse snapped, pointing an accusatory finger. Ria jumped up, ignoring the shooting pain in her neck. She grabbed the possessed nurse by the arm. Okay, time to go. The ghost is leaving. Unhand me, wench. Silas's voice boomed from the nurse's throat. I have not finished critiquing the triage protocol. Silas, get out of her. You're going to get me sectioned, Ria yelled, violently shaking the woman by the shoulders. With a loud pop, Silas was forcefully ejected from the nurse's body, stumbling backward into the air. The nurse blinked rapidly, swaying on her feet. She looked around the waiting room, utterly confused. Whoa! Head rush. Did I just ask for a quill? Concussion is contagious. Bye. Ria laughed nervously. She grabbed the sleeping Baz by the collar and dragged him toward the sliding doors. Back at the flat, the neon vape shop sign across the street bathed the dark room in a blinking pink light. Ria was back on the beanbag, wearing her foam neck brace. Silas drifted silently by the window, staring out at the rain. I attempted to improve public literacy. I should be thanked, Silas muttered defensively. You tried to hijack a nurse, Silas, Ria mumbled. Silas turned to face her. So, the script, the cheese rolling. I deleted it, Ria admitted. Silas raised a spectral eyebrow. You were right. It wasn't about the cheese, Ria said, and the hill was angry like a stepdad was maybe a first draft. A zero draft, Silas corrected. But being up there, falling, it made me realise something, Ria said softly, that gravity is undefeated. No, that people do it because they're bored and desperate, Ria explained. And for 25 seconds, when you're falling, you're not thinking about your rent or your follower count or the fact that the planet is burning. You're just falling. Silas looked at her. He nodded, slowly. Escapism, through localized violence. Yeah, I wrote a paragraph about that. In the taxi, she said, holding out a crumpled paper napkin. Silas drifted over and took it. He read the ink scrawled on the back of the receipt, pausing for a long moment. We fall, so we can feel the ground catch us. Ria waited, holding her breath. It is not nauseating, Silas said softly. The semicolon is misplaced, but the sentiment is adequate. Ria grinned, wincing as the movement pulled at her bruised cheek. Adequate, yes. Do not get excited, Silas scoffed, turning away to hide a very small smile. You still look like a swamp creature. Go wash. You smell of damp earth and failure. As Ria hobbled toward the bathroom, she paused at the door. Hey, Silas? Yes? Thanks for, haunting me up that hill. I was merely ensuring my investment didn't perish, Silas replied coolly. As she shut the bathroom door, Silas looked down at the napkin again, finally allowing himself to actually smile. The next morning, the sunlight was blinding. Ria sat in the middle of the room, still wearing her neck brace, holding her phone up to record a new TikTok. So guys, update. The cheese won, she said brightly to the camera. But we move. Literally, I can't move my neck, but we move emotionally. Check out the link in bio for my new Substack, Notes from the Mud. She stopped recording with a satisfied sigh. Silas, hovering nearby, stared at the phone screen in absolute bewilderment. Substack? Is that a sandwich? It's a newsletter, Silas, Ria laughed. Does it pay? He asked suspiciously. No, but it gives me validation, she replied. Silas let out a long, long sigh. Then let us begin chapter 2, he said, rubbing his spectral temples. And please remove the neck brace. It makes you look like a disgruntled turtle. Chapter 3. The Ice Block and the Neon Light. The attic bedroom was entirely grey. It was a freezing, unforgiving cold, the kind of 5 a.m. that physically hurts the bones. Ria Khan, thoroughly dishevelled and wearing an oversized pair of pyjamas that optimistically read main character energy, groaned as she groped blindly across her nightstand to turn off an alarm that wasn't ringing. Her hand didn't find the familiar, comforting plastic of her iPhone. Instead, it hit something shockingly cold and completely wet. She sat up, blinking rapidly in the gloom. There, sitting perfectly centered on a floral saucer like a morning tea cake, was a solid block of ice. Encased entirely in the frozen center, glowing faintly with a muffled notification light, was her phone. No, 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 Ria whispered, her breath puffing white in the air. Silas Thorne stood by the rain-streaked window, his hands clasped sharply behind his back. Looking particularly solid in his immaculate tweed suit and pocket square, he was admiring the miserable gloom of a rainy Gloucester dawn. The muse does not strike, Ria. She must be courted, Silas announced without turning around, with discipline and frost. Silas! Ria shrieked, frantically touching the smooth, freezing surface of the ice block. I have a brand deal dropping at 8 a.m. Skinny tea for bloated bays. If I don't post, I breach contract. Silas turned slowly, a smug, self-satisfied smile resting beneath his pencil moustache. Bloated bays? Sounds like a medical condition requiring leeches, not tea, he noted dryly. I have done you a kindness. Distractions are the enemy of art. He floated closer, gesturing grandly toward the small wooden table. Suffering is free, and essential for the great novel. Now. Up. Ria looked. Sitting on the table was a bowl filled with what appeared to be wet cement. What is that? Cold porridge. No sugar, Silas explained pleasantly. Sugar excites the humours. We begin with 6 hours of silence. Ria stared at her phone trapped in the ice block. It buzzed again, a pathetic, muffled vibration against the frozen water. She twitched. I'm going to microwave the ice, she declared, tossing her duvet aside. The microwave is unplugged, Silas countered smoothly. As is the router. I found the fuse box. Ria scrambled out of bed, grabbing the heavy saucer and hugging the ice block directly to her chest, desperately trying to melt it with her own body heat. You are a monster. A tweed-wearing, monocle-popping monster, she chattered, shivering violently. I don't wear a monocle. It's affectation, Silas replied, highly offended. Now. Sit. Right. The silence begins. Now. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Then a sharp electric buzz shattered the quiet. Buzz. Across the street, the neon, cloudy with a chance of vape sign flickered to life. It flashed an aggressive, rhythmic sequence. Red. Dark. Red. Dark. Silas's left eye twitched. What? Is that infernal luminescence? Yeah. It's 24 hours now, Ria muttered miserably. The harsh red light bathed Silas's pale, grayscale face, making him look suddenly demonic. That sign. It mocks me, Silas hissed, glaring down at the street. It lacks rhythm. It lacks purpose. Vape. What is a vape? Is it a serpent? It's flavoured air for people with anxiety, Ria said, hugging the melting ice block. Like me. Right now. By the afternoon, the silence had broken Ria completely. She sat at her makeshift desk, physically shaking. Her leg bounced uncontrollably against the table leg, and she aggressively scratched her arm. I just need to check my engagement metrics, Ria whispered to the wall, her eyes wild. Just one peek. Did the algorithm bless me? Is I show speed reacting to my unboxing? Silas paced the room behind her. Every time the neon sign flashed outside, he winced as if struck. Focus! The emptiness of the page is the mirror of the soul. My soul is empty because it hasn't consumed content in 4 hours, Silas. I'm detoxing, Ria yelled, rubbing her eyes. I think I'm seeing things. I feel itchy. My thumb hurts from not scrolling. I think I see pixels in the air. Ignore the hallucinations. That's just malnutrition. It sharpens the prose, Silas dismissed. Defeated, Ria grabbed a pen and stared at the blank paper. Okay, fine. The Great Novel, Chapter 1. She wrote a line, scratched it out violently, and wrote it again. Silas floated over her shoulder, reading the fresh ink aloud. It was a dark and stormy vibe. Vibe? It sets the scene, Ria defended. Silas read the next line, his voice dripping with horror. The main character, low-key depressed but high-key slaying. Ria. What language is this? Is this Aramaic? It's how people talk. You want realism? This is realism, Ria argued passionately. He looked at her and said, bet. Silas let out a long, agonizing groan. Bet? Wager? What is he wagering? His soul? Agreement, affirmation. Oh my God, you're exhausting, Ria groaned, dropping her head onto the desk with a thud. Next to her, the ice block had melted into a puddle inside the bowl, revealing a completely waterlogged, soggy phone. She poked it. The screen remained stubbornly black. Dead battery. It's dead. I'm dead. My career is dead. Good, Silas said cheerfully. Now that you are ruined, you are ready to create art. Take dictation. Ria lifted her head. What? I shall dictate my memoirs, Silas announced, fluffing his pocket square. The world must know of my struggles with the Bloomsbury Group. Write. Ria sighed deeply and grabbed a fresh sheet of paper. Chapter 1. The Folly of the Fairer Sex, Silas boomed proudly. Ria's pen stopped dead. Excuse me? It is a known fact that the female mind, while charmingly decorative, lacks the fortitude for the structural integrity of a sonnet. Silas continued smoothly. Ria dropped the pen instantly. Nope. Hard pass. Cancelled. Immediately cancelled. She fired off, standing up. Do you want to get doxed by a ghost hunter? Because that's how you get doxed. I am speaking my truth, Silas argued. Your truth is a hate crime, Silas. We are not writing that, Ria snapped. She paused, her eyes suddenly lighting up with a dangerous idea. Wait, I have an idea. 10 minutes later, Ria had constructed a makeshift tripod out of a precarious stack of Silas's old, musty books. Taped securely to the top volume was a secondary smartphone. Silas inspected the screen with absolute horror. You had a spare? Emergency burner, Ria explained, swiping open the screen. For when I get banned or drop my phone in the toilet. Look, we compromise. You want to critique culture? Critique this. She pulled up a TikTok video. A teenager appeared on screen, launching into a frenetic, limb-flailing dance set to a sped-up, high-pitched chipmunk version of a rap song. Silas squinted at the tiny glowing screen. Why is she gyrating? Is she in pain? He asked, genuinely concerned. Is this a mating ritual or a seizure? It's the renegade, or a version of it, Ria laughed. React to it. Just say what you feel. I'm filming you. Well, filming where you would be. I'll voice over your lines later. Silas leaned in, utterly mesmerized by the horror of modern entertainment. The composition is atrocious. Vertical video? It narrows the world, and her expression, dead eyes, he critiqued sharply, a smile that does not reach the soul. She moves like a marionette whose puppeteer is drunk. Keep going, Ria encouraged, pointing the camera at the empty space. This is gold. Victorian ghost roasts Gen Z. It's viral material. Viral? Like the influenza? Silas asked, raising a brow. Yes, but good, Ria replied. She swiped to the next video, showing someone pouring an obscene waterfall of melted cheese over a hamburger. Stop! Stop it at once! Silas gasped, covering his eyes. That is gluttony manifest. Why is the cheese yellow? It looks like melted crayons. This is the fall of Rome. Ria was laughing, actually genuinely laughing. See? You're a natural hater. The internet loves a hater. For a split second, there was a real connection between them. Silas lowered his hands, looking oddly pleased by her genuine amusement. I am not a hater. I am a critic. I maintain standards, he said, puffing out his chest. Suddenly, the burner phone vibrated violently. A text notification blocked the screen. Urgent. Teeth whitening are due in 10 minutes or no pay. Silas read the glowing letters. His smile fell instantly. You were not recording my critique for art. You were stalling to charge the device for teeth whitening. Silas, I have to. The electricity bill is £200. Ria panicked. She grabbed the phone, propped it up against the books, and instantly switched gears. Her face transformed into a high-pitched fake smile with completely dead eyes. Her influencer voice. Hey guys, so many of you have been asking how I keep my smile so bright while writing my novel. Ria chirped into the lens, holding up a cheap plastic kit. Use code RIA20 for 20% off and stay gleaming, besties. She quickly cut the video and slumped back in her chair, exhausted. Silas stared at her, the disappointment radiating off him in waves. The temperature in the room plummeted 10 degrees. That was grotesque, he said quietly. You are selling your soul for fluoride. It was 50 quid, Silas. 50 quid I need so we don't freeze to death, Ria yelled, the shame making her defensive. I am already dead. I do not freeze, Silas countered. But you are freezing your dignity. Dignity doesn't buy groceries. You think I like this? You think I want to peddle plastic junk to 12-year-olds? Ria cried. Then why do it? Write something real. Because nobody reads. Okay? Nobody reads the long, sad books you like. They watch 15-second clips. If I don't post, I don't exist, Ria screamed, finally voicing her deepest fear. That is a lie. You exist because you think, because you feel, Silas bellowed back. I post, therefore I am. Is that your philosophy? Descartes would weep. You had a trust fund, Silas. I looked you up. Ria threw back at him, striking a nerve. You lived off your daddy's textile money while you played tortured artist in Paris. I am working class. I am hustling. Silas looked physically struck. He staggered back in the air. I contributed to the cultural conversation. You wrote reviews that made people cry. You were a troll, an analog troll, Ria shouted. Outside, the neon vape sign flashed rapidly, filling the room with manic red light. Red, red, red. I was a guardian of taste, Silas roared. His rage spiked uncontrollably. The overhead lights in the apartment flickered violently, and the low hum of the miniature refrigerator rose to a terrifying, metallic scream. Silas, calm down. The fuse box, Ria warned, backing away. I will not calm down, Silas bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. This world is noise and flashing lights and teeth whitening. Where is the soul? He slammed his spectral hand into the wall directly beside the electrical panel. With a loud pop, a shower of blue sparks erupted from the fuse box. The refrigerator died. The heater died. The apartment plunged into total, absolute darkness. The only illumination was the relentless, rhythmic red flashing of the neon sign across the street. Silence stretched out in the pitch black. Well, Ria's voice broke the quiet. You fixed the electricity bill problem. An hour later, Ria was sitting on the floorboards, entirely wrapped up in her duvet to fight off the creeping chill. Silas hovered quietly by the windowsill, looking out at the rain. My phone is at 4%. I could use the flashlight, but I'm saving it, Ria said softly. It was Father's money. You were right, Silas confessed into the dark, his voice barely a whisper. Ria looked up. The rhythmic red light washed over him, making him look less like a terrifying ghost and more like a sad, faded photograph. He owned mills in Manchester, Silas continued quietly. Dreadful places. I never visited. I just cashed the checks and critiqued the poetry of men who worked for a living. Ria pulled the duvet tighter around her shoulders. I'm not really writing a novel, she admitted. I just put that in my bio to sound smart. I mostly just scroll until my eyes hurt because if I stop, I start thinking about how lonely I am. Loneliness is the only thing we have in common, Ria. That and this drafty attic, Silas noted gently. Why didn't you cross over, Silas? Why are you still here? She asked. Silas looked down at the vape sign. I never finished my book. I spent so much time judging others. I was afraid to put my own words on the page. Afraid they would be found wanting. Fear is the mind killer, Ria quoted, resting her chin on her knees. Herbert? Silas asked. June, the movie with Timothée Chalamet, she corrected. I do not know Timothée. Is he a poet? In a way, Ria smiled. She crawled across the dark floor, dragging her duvet behind her until she sat near the windowsill, much closer to him. Look, I'll make a deal with you. I won't do any more teeth-whitening ads. And I shall attempt to be less cancelable, Silas offered. Start small, no more speeches about the weaker sex. Agreed, he nodded. And maybe we can write something. Together, Ria suggested softly. Not a TikTok, not a memoir, just a story. A story. I would like that, Silas replied earnestly. Suddenly, the burner phone buzzed in the dark. The battery icon flashed, 1%. Ria grabbed it, her eyes widening as the screen lit up. Oh my God, the Victorian Ghost Roast's Gen Z audio. I accidentally uploaded it before the power died. What? Silas asked, floating closer. It has 50,000 views, Ria gasped, scrolling rapidly through the notifications. The comments. Based, Grandpa. Who is this voice actor? He sounds hot. Drag her, King. Silas straightened his tie immediately, preening proudly in the glow of the red streetlight. Based? King? They like you, Silas. They think you're a character, she grinned. A genuine, pleased smile crept across the ghost's face. Well, naturally, quality recognizes quality. Don't let it go to your head. Silas puffed his chest. Read me another comment. The one about my voice being hot? Ria burst out laughing, just as the street outside shifted. Across the road, a shop worker finally flipped a switch. The vape sign went steady, casting a solid, dim red glow over the attic, putting an end to the agonizing flashing. The room suddenly felt peaceful. Ria let out a long yawn. Tomorrow, we write tomorrow. Tomorrow, 5 a.m., Silas prompted. 9 a.m., Ria compromised, and coffee, not porridge. 8:30, and tea, Silas countered. Deal. Ria closed her eyes, pulling the duvet over her head. Silas hovered nearby in the dark, watching over her, looking, for the very first time in a century, like he might actually have a purpose. Chapter 4. The Gig Economy Gothic. The attic apartment was a landscape of soft despair. Ria, 23 and chronically broke, was slumped on the sofa, which was currently doubling as a life raft in a sea of financial panic. She was surrounded by the detritus of gig economy survival, empty instant noodle cups, a notepad grimly titled Organs I Don't Need, and a pile of clothes she was trying to photograph for the resale app Vinted. Holding up a grey hoodie with a very suspicious dark stain near the pocket, Ria squinted, trying to find a flattering angle with her phone camera to hide the blemish. She muttered to herself as she typed out the listing. Vintage oversized streetwear. Rustic condition. Smells like memories. And Fabrezi. Mostly Fabrezi, £45. No low ballers. I know what I have. A notification popped up on her phone with a cheerful ding that sounded mocking in the silence. She winced, closing one eye before looking at the robotic, cheerfully cruel automated alert. Monzo alert. Your balance is minus £14.50. Ria groaned, a long, guttural sound, burying her face in a pillow that smelled faintly of mildew and existential dread. I'm going to have to sell a kidney, she muttered into the fabric. Or feet pics. Which is worse? Don't answer that. The market for feet is probably oversaturated anyway. I bet there's an AI for that now. Mid-journey, generate feet with high arches and student debt. Near the messy bookshelf, Silas floated. Dressed in sensible Harris tweed, he was methodically rearranging Ria's small collection of paperbacks, using telekinesis to nudge them millimeters to the left, grouping them by melancholy rather than by author. He paused at a copy of The Hunger Games. The mood is heavy, Silas observed. Heavier than a Russian novel written during a famine. Did your digital validation machine fail to dispense the required dopamine? Or has a stranger on the internet disagreed with your opinion on oat milk? Worse. I'm overdrawn, Ria sighed. I need cash, fast, and not wait 60 days for a brand invoice cash. I need cash in hand cash. I need no questions asked, put the money in the bag cash. I believe that is called crime. Or perhaps politics, Silas replied smoothly. Have you considered marrying a distant cousin? In my day, a strategic union with a second cousin could secure one's finances for a decade. That's illegal and gross, and I don't have any rich cousins, Ria shot back. It's called the gig economy, Silas. Same desperation, better branding. You sacrifice your dignity in 15-minute increments instead of all at once. Ria grabbed her phone and scrolled frantically through a job app called Task Rabbit Hole. Dog walker for aggressive chihuahua. No, I like my ankles, she read aloud. Human statue for grand opening of a carpet warehouse. I sneeze too much. Medical trial for experimental hay fever drug. Tempting, but the side effect is spontaneous weeping. I do that anyway. She stopped, squinting at the screen, and sat up, dislodging a pile of socks. Wait. Performance artist needed for nightly historical experience. Must have strong lungs, own cape, preferred but not essential, and a high tolerance for damp. Later that day, at the gloomy Gloucester docks, the grey water slapped against the Victorian stone walls with a depressing, rhythmic wetness. The sky was the colour of a bruise, and aggressive seagulls were fighting over a discarded chip wrapper like gladiators in an amphitheatre of Greece. Ria stood shivering in front of Dave, a man in his 50s who clearly believed he was born in the wrong century, despite wearing an Apple Watch. He was dressed in a battered top hat, a cheap cape that looked like a velvet curtain stolen from a community theatre production of Dracula, and plastic vampire teeth that made him lisp slightly. He held a plastic lantern with an LED candle inside that flickered arrhythmically. "The question is not if you can guide, but if you can haunt," Dave boomed theatrically. "Can you scream? I need a scream that says, 'I have seen the abyss and it is damp.'" "Internally? Constantly," Ria replied, deadpan. "Out loud? I mean, I screamed when I saw my heating bill last month." "Channel that. Give me your best Victorian governess sees a spectre in the nursery." Ria took a deep breath, looked around at the passers-by eating ice cream, and let out a half-hearted, terrified yelp that sounded remarkably like a cat being stepped on in a library. Dave considered it for a moment. "It has a certain millennial ennui, a distinct lack of hope. I like it." He nodded approvingly. "It feels authentic to the current rental market. It says, 'I am haunted by the impossibility of home ownership.'" He clapped a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Hired. Welcome to the Gloucester Ghost Walk, love. £10 an hour plus tips. If you faint, we leave you for atmosphere. The tourists love a body. Adds to the authenticity. We had a guy pass out last week. Tipped him a £5 thinking he was a plague victim." He handed her a thick script stained with coffee, and what one hoped was fake blood, though it was stickier than syrup and smelled strongly of strawberries. "Learn the Attic of Doom section by tonight. It's our big closer. It's where we make the merch sales. We move a lot of I Survived the Gloucester Ghost Walk tea towels." That evening, Ria stood on the pavement at street level outside her own apartment building, looking up at her dark window. She was wearing a cheap, synthetic velvet cape she had found in a charity shop bin. It was slightly too short, exposing her jeans and trainers. She held the script like a hymnal, trying to project her voice and look ominous, while a Deliveroo driver buzzed past on a moped, nearly clipping her cape and ruining the vibe. And here, in the shadow of the cathedral, lies the abode of Silas the Strangler. Ria read aloud, trying to project over the traffic. Up in the attic apartment, Silas froze mid-float. The copy of Twilight, which he was reading ironically to understand the decline of the vampire genre, dropped from his spectral grip. He drifted to the window, passing through the curtains like smoke. "The Strangler?" Silas gasped. "I have never strangled anything more substantial than a cravat." Oblivious, Ria continued reading from the street below. A deranged lover who, in a fit of unbridled passion and madness, choked to death on a buttery crumpet while plotting the demise of his mistress. Silas's face turned a ghostly, incandescent shade of purple. The temperature in the attic dropped 10 degrees instantly, and frost patterns bloomed across the window glass, cracking the condensation. Gripping the window frame in pure outrage, Silas bellowed down at her. "A crumpet? I did not choke on a crumpet. I have never eaten a crumpet in anger. I am a man of scones. This is slander of the highest order." As night fully fell, Ria returned to the dimly lit apartment to practice her spooky voice. Silas literally hovered over her shoulder, jabbing a spectral finger at the page so hard it rippled the paper. "This is libel, defamation," Silas shouted. "Silas the Strangler? I never strangled anyone, except perhaps a particularly dangling participle in a draft by D.H. Lawrence, and even then it was a mercy killing. The sentence was suffering." "Silas, chill, it's just a story," Ria pleaded. "Tourists want drama. They want blood. They don't want Silas the mildly annoyed critic. They want to feel fear, not grammatical insecurity." "It says here I owned a blood-red velvet cape and dabbled in the dark arts," Silas fumed. "I did not own a velvet cape. I am not a magician. I wore tweed, sensible, itchy, Harris tweed, and my dark arts were trying to get a refund on a fountain pen that leaked." That was dark magic considering the bureaucracy involved. Okay, look, I get it. It's inaccurate. But guy in tweed dies of heart attack isn't exactly scary, Ria sighed. It's just standard British medical history. It's the leading cause of death for men who repress their emotions. It wasn't just a heart attack, it was intellectual apoplexy, Silas argued defensively. I was reading a review of Ulysses that missed the point so entirely, so catastrophically, that my heart simply refused to beat for a world that contained such stupidity. That is tragic. That is noble. That is a death of principle. It's nerdy. It's terminal nerdiness. You died of being a snob, Silas, Ria stated flatly. Look, I have to say the script or Dave fires me. And if Dave fires me, we eat porch ice for dinner. Do you want me to starve? Do you want me to have to sell the Twilight books? Silas gasped, clutching his chest. You wouldn't. I haven't finished judging Bella's choices yet. Then let me do the tour, Ria said. You will not soil my legacy for £10 an hour. You are my biographer by proxy. Correct the record. If you must sell my death, sell the truth of it. Make them fear the power of the written word. Fine, fine. Let's practice a compromise, Ria conceded. I'll make it scary, but truthful. I'll make grammar terrifying. She cleared her throat, adopting her mystical narration voice, waving her hands. Here lived Silas, the literary pedant. Silas tilted his head, considering it. Pedant implies precision. I'll allow it. It suggests a dangerous attention to detail. Who died tragically, correcting grammar, Ria added. Silas nodded vigorously. While fighting the decline of Western civilization one semicolon at a time. Add that. It raises the stakes. It makes me a warrior, a martyr for syntax. And now his spirit haunts these halls, judging your outfit choices and silently correcting your pronunciation of chorizo. Accurate. Very good, Silas approved. Use that. The fear of judgment is far more potent than the fear of death. People fear nothing more than being told they are incorrect in public. Silas, the tourists are going to ask for a refund. They want ghosts, not a grammar lesson, Ria warned. They want shivers, not syntax. Then they shall be educated. Now practice the swoon. Your swoon is lackluster. It lacks commitment to the faint. You fall like a sack of potatoes. You must fall like a wilting lily. Out on the dark, cobbled streets of Gloucester, Ria found herself leading a truly chaotic group of 15 tourists. It was a mixed bag. A rowdy Hindu wearing bride tribe sashes and holding inflatable appendages, a bored family with teenagers glued to their phones, and one serious man in a tactical vest named Keith. Keith had actually brought an EMF meter and was recording the entire experience on a GoPro strapped to his head. Ria held her lantern high at the front of the group, though she had to smack it every few seconds to keep the loose battery connection alive. And here is the bishop's palace, where a monk once dropped a very heavy Bible on his toe, Ria stammered. The group stared at her in silence. The wind whistled. Someone coughed. It got infected? Gangrene. Very smelly, Ria continued awkwardly. He died of toe rot. It was a slow, agonizing, limping death. He haunts the cloisters, looking for comfortable sandals. Chantelle, the bride-to-be, swayed slightly while holding a can of Prosecco and decided to heckle. Boring. Where's the murder? We were promised decapitations. I paid 15 quid for blood, not podiatry issues. A teenager in the back didn't even look up from his phone screen. This is cringe. I could be watching slime videos right now. Why is the Wi-Fi so bad in the 1800s? Nearby, Keith pointed his EMF meter directly at a drainpipe. I'm getting a reading. Wait, no. That's a 5G tower. False alarm, people. Just radiation. Suddenly, Dave appeared from the shadows behind a recycling bin like a budget Batman. Jazz it up. Give them the gore. The toe is weak, Ria. The toe is weak, he hissed loudly. Talk about the pus. Describe the colour of the gangrene. Make them gag. Ria swallowed hard as the group approached her apartment building. It loomed dark and narrow against the night sky. Above them, Silas was perfectly visible in the attic window, bathed in the orange glow of a street lamp. He looked down expectantly, incredibly proud and regal, like a king on a balcony reviewing his subjects, and paused to adjust his tweed tie for his tribute. And now, the grand finale. The attic of grammar, Ria announced. The crowd fell completely silent and confused. Keith frowned, tapping his meter. Grammar? He mouthed. In this very house lived Silas, Ria tried, a man who really, really hated split infinitives. He loathed them with the fire of 1,000 suns. Silas nodded approvingly from the window, gesturing grandly for her to continue. Go on, tell them about the Oxford comma. It is the difference between let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma. Tell them about the cannibalism inherent in poor punctuation, he urged from above. One day he read a bad book review, a really bad one, like 1 star on Goodreads bad, and passed away. From sheer disappointment, Ria pressed on. His heart just gave up on humanity. Silence fell over the crowd again. A cricket chirped. A car alarm went off in the distance. Someone cracked open a can of lager. Boo! That's rubbish, Chantel yelled. Did he eat a crumpet? The brochure said he choked on a crumpet. I want the crumpet killer. No crumpets. Just intense literary criticism, and a weak ventricle, and a profound sense of ennui, Ria pleaded. This sucks. Can we go to Wetherspoons? This is literally worse than school. The teenager groaned. From the shadows, Dave stepped forward, making frantic, cutthroat gestures at Ria. He pointed aggressively to his wallet and shook his head violently. Ria looked up at the window. Silas gave her a stiff, unnaturally formal thumbs up, a gesture he had clearly learned from her, looking like he was holding a tiny, invisible apple. Ria looked at the angry mob starting to turn away, then thought of her entirely empty bank account. She looked at Chantel, who looked ready to hurl a half-eaten kebab at her head. Actually, I lied, to protect you, Ria suddenly pivoted. The crowd stopped in their tracks. They leaned in. Ria lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, leaning close to Chantel through the overwhelming smell of cheap Prosecco. The truth is, he was a monster. They call him Silas the Slasher. But he didn't slash with a knife. He slashed with his teeth. Up in the window, Silas's thumbs up dropped instantly. His mouth opened in a perfect O of absolute horror, and he floated closer to the glass, pressing his spectral nose right against it. He didn't just die, he choked. On a crumpet, Ria declared. But not just any crumpet, a cursed crumpet, baked with the flour of evil and the butter of betrayal. The crowd gasped. Dave nodded enthusiastically from the shadows, mouthing, Yes, the butter of betrayal, gold. Cursed crumpet, the betrayal. She is mocking my soufflé disaster of 1922. This is insubordination. I am a ghost, not a cartoon. Silas screamed from the attic. And they say he hates modern food, specifically fried potatoes, Ria continued boldly. If you stand here and eat chips, he gets very, very jealous, because he can only eat ghost crumpets, which are very dry, like eating a sponge made of sadness. A tourist holding a styrofoam tray of heavily loaded cheesy chips laughed nervously. What, like this? He asked, holding up a chip to taunt the attic. Suddenly, the air grew freezer-burn cold. The breath of the tourists plumed white in the air. The streetlights flickered violently, buzzing like angry hornets, and a low rumble vibrated through the soles of their shoes. Silas, don't. Please don't. Not the chips. Anything but the chips, Ria whispered, terrified. The styrofoam tray was violently ripped from the tourist's hands by an invisible force. It hovered ominously, 6 feet up in the air, rotating slowly, the melted, glowing cheese stretching upwards in stringy, gravity-defying ectoplasmic tendrils. The tourists looked up in absolute terror. The crowd screamed as Keith's EMF meter wailed like an air raid siren. It's off the charts. It's a Class 5 apparition, or a magnet, or mass hysteria. I'm getting it all on the GoPro. Keith shrieked. Splat! The chips launched themselves at the brick wall with the velocity of a bullet. They stuck to the brickwork, rearranging themselves with unnatural precision. Grease dripped down the wall as the flattened chips perfectly spelled out a word. Philistines. Philistines. The crowd went completely wild, cheering and taking photos with flash. OMG, did you see that? The ghost hates chips. It's real. Take a selfie with the chips. #HauntedChips. #Philistines. What does Philistines mean? Is it a type of cheese? Chantel squealed. Dave grabbed Ria's arm, his eyes shining with pound signs. Brilliant. Special effects. How did you do the magnet thing? Was it a wire? That was genius. You're a star, kid. I'm doubling your cut. We'll sell I Got Chipped by Silas's t-shirts. Ria just stared at the greasy chips sliding down the brickwork, the letters slowly becoming an illegible smear of cheese and potato. Yeah, special effects, she murmured. Just magnets, and a lot of repressed anger, and a really, really upset ghost. Later that night, the apartment door creaked open. Ria entered slowly, guilt radiating off her like cheap perfume, clutching a wad of crumpled cash. The apartment was silent. Silas was hovering inches above his ragged armchair, facing away from her. He was staring mournfully at a blank, peeling section of floral wallpaper with intense concentration. "Silas?" Ria ventured carefully. "Baked with the flour of evil?" Silas asked, his voice icy, without turning around. I panicked. They were going to leave. Dave was going to fire me. Ria defended herself. And the crumpet? You doubled down on the crumpet, Ria. You made the crumpet central to my mythology, he accused. I am now the crumpet ghost. Children will leave baked goods at the door to appease me. I shall be remembered not for my wit, but for my imaginary inability to swallow breakfast goods. Ria put the crumpled cash on the table. Look at this. 80 quid in tips, plus the wages. Dave gave me a raise. We can pay the internet bill. We can buy actual food. We can turn the heating on for an hour. We can buy you a new copy of Ulysses to shout at. Silas turned slowly, looking older and incredibly tired. His transparency flickered like a bulb about to go out. You sold my dignity for cheesy chips and applause from a woman wearing a sash that said, "Buy me a shot. I'm tying the knot." I sold a story. That's what you do, isn't it? You write fiction. You embellish. You told me your memoirs were based on a true story, but you added a duel that never happened. Ria shot back. I write truth. Fiction is the lie that tells the truth. You just told a lie that bought chips, Silas countered. You turned my life, my tragedy, my isolation, my desperate need for perfection into a pantomime. A cheap sideshow for people who think you is a word. I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have said the crumpet thing. I felt bad as soon as I said it, Ria admitted. But the Philistines thing? That was impressive. A flicker of pride crossed Silas's face before he instantly suppressed it. The kerning on the P was a bit sloppy. Telekinesis is an imprecise art when working with processed potato. It lacks the structural integrity of stone. I was aiming for Times New Roman, but I fear it came out as Comic Sans. They loved you. You were the star. Keith, the EMF guy, was crying tears of joy. He thinks you're the proof of the afterlife he's been searching for. He thinks the chips were a message from the beyond, she offered softly. I was a circus act, a performing monkey, Silas said quietly, floating over to the window to look down at the grease stain on the wall below. Keep the money, Ria. Survive. Pay your internet bill. But do not ask me to perform again. I am a critic, not a cabaret. I will not be the clown in your gig economy circus. If I am to haunt, it will be on my own terms. With that, he faded out, disappearing completely, leaving only the smell of old paper and ozone in the cold air. Ria stood alone in the room. She looked at the money, which suddenly felt dirty in her hands. With a heavy sigh, she picked up her smartphone and opened the Notes app. She typed a title, The True Story of Silas. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen before typing. He didn't die because of a crumpet. He died because he cared too much about words. He died because the world wasn't precise enough for him. And frankly, he was a bit of a drama queen. She stared at the text, Then she deleted the last sentence entirely. She typed, "Silas was a snob." Smiling faintly, she saved the note and went to turn on the heater. The low hum of the electric radiator slowly filled the silence, but the room still felt incredibly cold without the ghost to complain about it. Chapter 5. The Tether and the Gorge. It was 6 a.m. on a Saturday, an hour that Ria firmly believed should only be seen by milkmen, insomniacs, and ghosts. Unfortunately, on this particular morning, she was sharing it with all three. Well, not a milkman, but certainly a ghost, and certainly Mrs. Pigeon, who was currently treating Ria's hallway like a loading dock at a highly caffeinated Amazon warehouse. "Grab the box with the ceramic owls, Ria, and mind the bottom, it's structurally compromised," Mrs. Pigeon shouted from down the hall amidst a muffled clattering. "Also, be careful with the bag of loose Scrabble tiles. I'm convinced there's a fortune to be made selling vowels to the elderly." Ria stood in the centre of her bedroom, staring blankly at the glowing screen of her laptop. The cursor blinked, offering a tiny, rhythmic mocking of her complete and utter failure as a writer. She had been awake since 3 in the morning, trying to draft a short story, and had written precisely 12 words. 11 of them were her name and the date. Silas, the resident spectre of the flat, was hovering 2 feet above her unmade bed, looking impeccably dressed and entirely unsympathetic. "You are staring at the machine again, Ria." Silas sighed, a sound like rustling dry leaves. "The machine will not give you the words. You must bleed them onto the page, or, in your case, gently tap them out while grimacing with the posture of a boiled prawn." "I don't have anything to bleed, Silas. I'm empty," Ria replied, her voice flat and exhausted. "It's called writer's block. It's a modern affliction caused by having to pay rent, eating too much processed cheese, and realizing you have nothing profound to say about the human condition." Defeated, Ria snapped the laptop shut. She slid the silver rectangle into her canvas tote bag, ignoring Silas's theatrical gasp of disapproval. Just then, Mrs. Pigeon burst into the room, holding a terrifying porcelain doll that was missing one eye. "Right, we are burning daylight. The early bird gets the worm, and the early boot sailor gets the slightly tarnished silver-plated teaspoons. Chop chop, you're driving." "Mrs. Pigeon, I really need to work," Ria started to protest. "Nonsense. Fresh air, commerce, the thrill of the haggle. It'll cure your little scribbler's block in no time," the landlady insisted. "Nothing stimulates the creative juices like watching 2 grown men fight over a rusty lawnmower. Grab your bag." Ria sighed heavily, slinging the unbleached hemp tote bag over her shoulder, and trudged toward the door. As she crossed the threshold of the bedroom, a strange, tearing sound echoed in the room, like a thick piece of silk being ripped in half. Ria turned. Silas was no longer hovering gracefully over the bed. He was plastered violently against the bedroom wall, his ghostly form stretching toward Ria like a piece of chewed gum pulled from a shoe. "Ria, what is happening?" Silas strained, deeply alarmed. "I am being drafted." Silas dug his spectral heels into the floorboards, but it was no use. An invisible tether, glowing with a faint, iridescent blue light, stretched directly from his chest into Ria's canvas tote bag. Specifically, it was attached to the laptop. Ria blinked. "Silas, are you stuck?" "I am not stuck. I am being actively abducted," Silas shrieked. "When I agreed to serve as your literary mentor, I bonded my spiritual essence to your creative instrument. I assumed it would remain upon the mahogany desk, not stuffed into a woven dungeon of unbleached hemp." Ria took a step backward into the hallway. The invisible tether yanked hard. Silas flew through the bedroom doorframe with an undignified yelp, tumbling head over heels in midair before stabilizing awkwardly next to the coat rack, his spectral nose inches from a damp umbrella. "Oh my God," Ria breathed, a slow, horrified realization dawning on her. "You're tethered to the laptop. If the laptop leaves the flat, you have to leave the flat." Silas smoothed his cravat, looking deeply offended. "I am a spirit of localized haunting. I am a tragic spectre of the domestic sphere. I do not commute." From the driveway outside, Mrs. Pigeon's voice rang out. "Ria, the one-eyed doll is looking at me funny. Hurry up." Ria looked at Silas, a wicked, exhausted smile creeping onto her face. "Well, Silas, looks like you're coming to the car boot sale. Put your seatbelt on, metaphorically speaking." Mrs. Pigeon's chariot was a 2004 Ford Fiesta with an engine that sounded like an asthmatic tractor. It was the colour of a bruised plum, smelled strongly of peppermint humbugs and wet dog, and possessed a suspension system that treated every pebble like a landmine. Ria gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Mrs. Pigeon sat in the passenger seat, completely unbothered, with a paper map of Somerset spread over her knees, despite having a smartphone glued to the dashboard displaying Google Maps because she simply didn't trust satellites. Squashed in the claustrophobic back seat, wedged between a box of moth-eaten encyclopedias and a terrifyingly realistic plastic mannequin leg, was Silas. The mannequin's foot rested right near his shoulder. The speed, the relentless, bone-shattering speed, Silas cried out, his voice muffled and traumatized as he clutched the door handle. "We are travelling at least 40 miles an hour. The human body was not designed to withstand such velocity. My ethereal form is vibrating at an undignified frequency." "We're in a 30 zone, Silas. We're actually under the speed limit," Ria said, keeping her eyes on the road. "And please don't yell. Mrs. Pigeon has a headache, and she hates it when you're dramatic." "Let's get some tunes on. Wake us up," Mrs. Pigeon declared, reaching for the radio. She jabbed a button on the dashboard, and the radio crackled to life, blasting a high-energy, heavily synthesized pop anthem by Little Mix. The bass vibrated violently through the rusted floorboards. Silas covered the sides of his head, despite lacking physical eardrums. What demon chorus is this? Why are the women yelling about shout-outs to their exes? What is an ex? Why is the music made of electricity and anger? "It's Little Mix, Silas. It's empowering," Ria whispered furiously to the rearview mirror. "Empowering! In my day, if a romance ended, one simply died of consumption or penned a bitter sonnet comparing the lady to a swamp. One did not demand a shout-out. Ria, turn this infernal carriage around," Silas demanded. Mrs. Pigeon tapped the glass of the speedometer aggressively. "Foot down, Ria. We have to navigate the magic roundabout in 5 miles. "Magic roundabout? Are there warlocks? What is a roundabout?" Silas shrieked. An hour later, Ria pulled the bruised plum Fiesta into the parking lot of a motorway service station. It was a bleak, fluorescent-lit monument to weary travellers, overflowing bins and overpriced coffee. Ria sat at a sticky, laminated table near the restrooms, staring at the Google Doc on her phone, still blank. She watched a toddler drop an ice cream cone onto the carpet and burst into instantaneous, world-ending tears. Ria felt a deep, profound kinship with the child. "Nothing. I have absolutely nothing to say," Ria muttered quietly to herself. "My life is just driving old ladies to sell junk. Where's the romance? Where's the sweeping tragedy? You can't write a novel about a Ford Fiesta and a sad W.H. Smith." Silas, meanwhile, was exploring. Having never left the flat, the modern world was an absolute assault on his delicate sensibilities. He floated a few inches off the linoleum floor, drifting past the claw machine with deep suspicion, before stopping at a brightly lit glass counter bathed in a warm, sickly yellow glow. The sign above it read, "Greg's." Ria looked up just in time to see Silas staring into the pastry display as if he were looking into the mouth of hell itself. She walked over, standing beside him with her terrible paper cup of coffee. "Ria, what are these?" Silas whispered, horrified. "Are they rations for a war I am unaware of?" "It's a bakery, Silas. Those are sausage rolls," Ria explained. Silas raised a trembling, translucent finger toward the glass. "Look at it, Ria. Look closely at the meat within the flaked crust." Ria leaned in and saw a perfectly standard, mass-produced sausage roll sitting upon its little tray, glistening slightly under the heat lamp. "It is grey, Ria. Pastry meat should not be grey," Silas noted, utterly devastated. "It is the exact hue of the River Thames at low tide. What tragic alchemy has occurred here? What sins did the pig commit to be reduced to this ashen cylinder of despair? Ria held back a laugh. It's just cheap pork and sage, Silas. It's meant to be eaten at 3 a.m. when you hate yourself, or in a car park in the rain. It's not meant to be analysed. Silas shook his head slowly, profoundly moved. This is what your century has become. You have conquered the air, you harness lightning for your music, you carry the library of Alexandria in your pockets, but you feed your people, grey tubes of sorrow. It is a profound tragedy. It is the fall of Rome, wrapped in puff pastry. Ria stopped. She looked at Silas, staring mournfully at the sausage roll. Then she looked at the tired father trying to wrangle 2 toddlers near the coffee machine, the teenager in the high-vis jacket staring blankly out the window, and the sad, sticky table she had just left. A profound tragedy. Ria pulled out her phone and quickly typed a single sentence into her blank document. The car boot sale was held in a muddy field that smelled of damp earth and fried onions. Row upon row of folding tables stretched into the distance, piled high with the detritus of human existence. VHS tapes, chipped teacups, rusty spanners, an alarming amount of Tupperware-lacking lids, and terrifying childhood toys. Mrs. Pigeon was entirely in her element. She moved through the aisles like a shark smelling blood in the water. She was ruthless. She was terrifying. 50 pence? For that? The left leg is completely shorter than the right? Mrs. Pigeon's aggressive voice drifted over the crowd in the distance. I'll give you 20 and a packet of mints and not a penny more. Do you think I was born yesterday? Ria leaned against the side of the Fiesta, nursing a lukewarm tea. The writer's block was still a physical weight in her mind, despite her brief moment of pastry-induced inspiration. Silas floated beside her, arms crossed, observing the crowds with morbid fascination. Look at them all. It's all just stuff. Meaningless junk moving from one dusty attic to another. Ria sighed. Why am I here? I should be writing something important. Something about love, or loss, or the sweeping nature of time. Not whatever this is. You are looking, Ria, but you are not seeing, Silas said quietly. He pointed toward Mrs. Pigeon, who was currently locked in a tense standoff with a nervous man in a fleece jacket, identified by a small cardboard sign as Keith, over a highly decorated, profoundly ugly ceramic frog. It was roughly the size of a melon and covered in plastic jewels. Observe. The woman, Mrs. Pigeon, does not actually want the amphibious monstrosity. It clashes with her aesthetic, Silas analysed, and the man in the fleece clearly despises it. Look how he avoids eye contact with the frog. Yet, look at the fire in their eyes. Look at the posturing, the negotiation. Ria watched. Mrs. Pigeon folded her arms, feigning absolute disinterest, and sighed heavily. Keith, the fleece wearer, nervously adjusted his glasses, standing his ground. It's tacky, Keith. It looks like it swallowed a chandelier. £1 is robbery. Mrs. Pigeon's voice drifted faintly over the crowd. It is not about the object, Ria. It is about the victory, Silas explained. It is about human connection, albeit antagonistic. It is a duel of wills fought over a terrifying piece of clay. That man is defending his pride. Perhaps the frog belonged to a spouse who wronged him, and selling it cheaply would be a final insult. Mrs. Pigeon is asserting her dominance over a chaotic, uncontrollable world. Silas turned to look at Ria. You claim you have no tragedy to write, no art, but art is not only found in grand ballrooms, bloody battlefields, and deathbeds. It is found in the desperate, absurd clinging to dignity in a muddy Somerset field. It is found in the grey sausage roll. The mundane is merely the epic, scaled down for daily consumption. Ria watched the exchange as Mrs. Pigeon finally handed over a silver coin, snatching the jewelled frog with a triumphant, terrifying grin. Keith, the fleece wearer, let out a long, defeated exhale, his shoulders slumping. Silas was right. It was a tiny, ridiculous, perfect piece of theatre. The triumph of the car boot sale was remarkably short-lived. An hour later, driving on the winding, dramatic roads cutting through the towering limestone cliffs of Cheddar Gorge, the Ford Fiesta decided it had experienced quite enough of the mortal realm. with a violent shudder, a noise like a dying washing machine, and a massive eruption of white smoke from the bonnet, the car died. "Bastard machine! Treacherous hunk of plum-coloured tin!" Mrs. Pigeon yelled, slamming her hands on the wheel. "Right, I'm going to walk up the bend to find a phone signal. Don't touch anything. If a sheep approaches, make yourselves look large and hiss at it." Mrs. Pigeon marched off down the winding road, becoming a solitary figure disappearing around a curve of imposing grey stone. Silence descended. It was total and absolute, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. The gorge walls rose on either side of them, massive, ancient, and entirely indifferent to human suffering. The sky above was a narrow strip of bruising purple twilight. Ria sat on the bonnet of the car, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. The isolation, the towering cliffs, the failed writing day, the sheer absurdity of her life, it all coalesced. The air in her lungs suddenly felt too thick. Her breathing hitched, becoming shallow and fast. "I can't do this. I'm wasting my life," Ria cried, her voice trembling on the edge of a full panic attack. "Everyone on Instagram is buying houses and going to networking brunches, and I am nearly 30. I haul junk for a living, my car is dead in a ditch, and I am sitting here talking to a Victorian ghost because I can't write a single decent paragraph. I'm a fraud. I'm completely empty. I have failed." Silas materialized next to her. He didn't float this time. He sat heavily on the bonnet beside her, the metal creaking slightly under his spectral weight. He looked more solid, more human than he had since the day she met him in her flat. He didn't offer a witty retort. He didn't mock her modern anxieties. "The stone cares nothing for us," Silas said softly, his voice completely devoid of its usual theatrics. "What?" Ria asked, confused through her tears. Silas looked up at the towering cliffs, his profile cast in deep shadow. "I used to ride through this gorge when I was alive. I felt much the same as you do now. Insignificant, crushed by the agonizing weight of time and my own mediocrity. The stone has stood for millions of years. It will stand long after you and I are entirely forgotten." Ria wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her jumper, listening. The panic was still there, fluttering in her throat, but Silas's calm, steady voice was an anchor in the storm. "When I was 5 and 20, I believed my poetry would shake the very foundations of the world," Silas continued. "I believed I was the voice of a generation. I was not. I was a footnote. I died young, arrogant, unpublished, and deeply in debt to a tailor. For decades, wandering that flat, I was furious. I raged against my own insignificance." He swept his arm toward the jagged peaks. "But look at these cliffs, Ria. They are magnificent. They are eternal, and they are completely silent. They have no voice. They feel no pain. They know no joy, and they cannot comprehend the tragedy of a grey pastry. We do." Silas looked down at his translucent hands, studying the faint glow of his own skin, before looking back at Ria. "The world is a heavy, silent stone," Silas recited, "that grinds the marrow from the bone, but in the dust a spark is caught, a fleeting joy, a fragile thought. We are the breath upon the glass. We love, we weep, and then we pass. So let the gorge keep all its pride. I have the fire that burns inside." The words hung beautifully in the cool evening air. The massive silence of the gorge seemed to soften, wrapping around them. Ria stared at him, her breathing finally slowing to a normal rhythm. "Did you write that?" she asked. Silas looked away, suddenly deeply shy, refusing to make eye contact. He cleared his throat. Unfortunately, due to a nasty bout of spirit flu he had contracted from the ghost of Robert Curthose at Gloucester Cathedral last Tuesday, his voice inexplicably dropped into the gruff, guttural register of an 11th century Norman warlord. "A very long time ago," Silas answered, sounding like a Viking preparing for battle. "A Tuesday, I believe. I never showed it to anyone. I thought it was too simple, too mundane. It lacked the requisite number of tragic swans to be considered proper literature by my peers." A small, genuine smile broke through Ria's tears. It's beautiful, Silas, and really, even with the sudden medieval battle cry inflection. Silas sniffed, his spectral form flickering slightly as he adjusted his cravat defensively. Yes, well, the Duke of Normandy is a notorious close talker, and spectral hygiene in the 12th century was entirely theoretical. But the point remains, Ria. You and I have a cosmic arrangement. I am bound to you, and by unfortunate extension, your woven hemp dungeon of a tote bag, until you pen a true masterpiece. The tether does not sever for mere mediocrity. I don't know if I can give you a masterpiece, Silas. Ria let out a watery chuckle. The best I have today is a single sentence about a depressing sausage roll. His voice softened again, the Norman gruffness fading back into something genuinely tender. Then we begin with the grey sausage roll, the masterpiece of the mundane. We must, for both our sakes. I believe in your words, Ria, and I vehemently refuse to spend eternity commuting to car boot sales. Is he reciting that bloody poem again, Ria? Mrs. Pigeon suddenly yelled from a distance down the gorge, her voice echoing off the ancient rocks. Tell the spectral ponce to wrap it up. I found a bloke with a tow truck, and tell him his Norman accent is rubbish. He sounds like he's swallowing a pine cone. Ria laughed out loud, a real, sudden, loud laugh that echoed off the ancient limestone walls, startling a pigeon from a high ledge. The panic had receded entirely, replaced by something warm, steady, and profound. 20 minutes later, the blinding headlights of a yellow recovery truck swept across the gorge walls. Mrs. Pigeon hung out the passenger window, waving a half-eaten packet of cheese and onion crisps in triumph. His name's Gary. He's charging me an arm, a leg, and my firstborn, but he also likes Little Mix. So we've bonded over, shout out to my ex. Get in, she yelled over the heavy rumble of the diesel engine. Ria climbed into the cramped, grease-smelling cab of the tow truck. Silas, tethered faithfully to the tote bag, squeezed in right next to her, looking with profound suspicion at Gary, the driver's array of flashing dashboard dials and a dangling pair of fuzzy dice. As the truck lurched forward, dragging the sad little plum-coloured Fiesta behind it, Ria unzipped her tote bag. She pulled out the laptop and flipped it open, the screen glowing warmly in the dim, cramped cab. "What are you doing?" Silas whispered, leaning over her shoulder. "The motion of this vehicle is entirely unsuitable for literary endeavours. You will induce a migraine." "I'm writing, Silas," Ria replied, her fingers hovering over the keyboard with a small smile playing on her lips. And she did. She didn't write about epic tragedies, sweeping romances, or the glamorous lives of people who went to networking brunches. She wrote about the tragic grey meat of a service station pastry. She wrote about the desperate, fiery battle over a jewelled ceramic frog in a muddy field. And she wrote about the quiet, heavy silence of an ancient gorge, and the pompous, brilliant ghost who finally shared his poetry with the world. She wrote, and the cursor never stopped moving. Chapter 6. The Algorithmic Nemesis. It had been exactly 4 days since the incident in Cheddar Gorge. 4 days since Ria had broken her seemingly insurmountable writer's block by chronicling the epic, melancholic saga of a grey service station sausage roll. For 96 glorious, uninterrupted hours, Ria had been riding the high of actual, genuine creativity. She had established something resembling a healthy routine. She woke up before noon, drank cheap instant coffee from a mug that didn't have a chip in it, and she wrote. Even Silas had been unusually cooperative, generously restricting his daily complaints about her modern syntax to a mere half-hour window just before lunch, mostly focusing his spectral rage on her misuse of the word literally and her tragic reliance on the M-dash. Things were going so well that absolute disaster was mathematically and inevitably imminent. The disaster arrived at exactly 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. It carried a matching set of matte-finished designer luggage, wore a perfectly tailored trench coat that cost more than Ria's annual rent, and smelled faintly of expensive sandalwood, oat milk lattes, and unearned confidence. "Ria, oh my God, look at you. You look so rustic," Bella squealed with breathy performative delight as she pushed through the door. "It's giving struggling artist chic. I'm obsessed." Is this vintage? It looks incredibly authentic. This was Bella, a university acquaintance whose entire relationship with Ria was built on quiet resentment and Bella's complete lack of self-awareness. While Ria was trying to stretch a £10 note over 4 days, Bella had published a Sunday Times bestseller titled The Weight of Petals, My Journey Through Nothingness, 200 pages of double-spaced agony about feeling slightly sad on a yacht in Mykonos, interspersed with Instagram poetry. Bella! Wow! Hi! What are you doing in Gloucester? Ria stammered, pulling down the hem of her oversized t-shirt to mask her crushing inadequacy. I thought you were living in that converted warehouse in Dalston, the one with the indoor swing. Oh, I am. The swing is doing wonders for my core. Bella glided into the flat, dropping her bags with an expensive thud. But my editor told me I need provincial isolation for my second book. The London scene is just so creatively deafening right now. I need to just reconnect with the gritty, authentic, damp reality of the working classes. No offence. Anyway, I'm crashing here for the week. Surprise, I brought matcha. Up near the ceiling fixture, Silas materialized from the shadows, crossing his translucent arms. His tweed suit looked particularly sharp and judgmental against the water-stained plaster of the hallway. He floated down slightly, circling Bella like a shark inspecting a confusing surfboard. What is that odour? She smells of pulverized wood, desperate ambition, and is that lavender? It is overpowering. Silas sniffed with dramatic disdain. Ria, who is this gleaming interloper? She has the aura of someone who has never queued for a public omnibus, let alone experienced actual hardship. Look at her footwear. They are entirely impractical for a haunting. Silas, shush. This is Bella. She's a friend from uni. And a published author? Ria muttered under her breath, keeping a rigid smile plastered on her face. An author? This child? What could she possibly have written? A treatise on the application of lip gloss in a brisk wind? Silas scoffed, a sound like dry leaves caught in a windstorm. I shall not be replaced as the resident literary genius by a woman who wears sunglasses indoors. I refuse to acknowledge her presence. I shall make the pipes groan to signal my displeasure. But Silas's disdain was about to be severely tested. Later that evening, Bella commandeered the small dining table, pushing aside Ria's unpaid bills with an apologetic smile. She produced a sleek silver MacBook, cracked her knuckles, and began to type. It was a continuous, flowing, infuriatingly rhythmic stream of productivity that made Ria want to throw herself out the attic window and into the canal. Silas drifted over to the table and hovered behind Bella, looking over her shoulder with an expression of performative boredom, ready to tear her modern sensibilities to shreds. Then Silas froze. His flickering blue form suddenly stabilized into a bright, solid luminescence. He leaned closer to the screen, his spectral mouth falling open. He slowly removed his invisible spectacles, polished them on his tweed lapel, and replaced them on his nose. My word, the syntax. It is flawless, Silas whispered, utterly entranced. What? Is it bad? Tell me it's bad, Ria hissed desperately from the sofa. Tell me she used a dangling modifier. Tell me she ended a sentence with a preposition, Silas, please. I need this. The ocean of her regret was not vast, but it was deep, a localized drowning of the soul. A semicolon. Used correctly. Silas marvelled, ignoring Ria completely as his nose nearly touched the glass of Bella's screen. And a metaphor that does not rely on popular culture or a fast food franchise. The cadence is... it is Tolstoyan. No, it is Bronte-esque, but with the ruthless, muscular economy of Hemingway. Bella sighed softly, stretching her arms above her head and reaching for her mug of matcha latte, which was slightly out of reach on the far side of the table. Before she could stretch her arm, the mug smoothly slid 3 inches across the table, perfectly positioning itself directly under her open hand. Bella, completely oblivious to the telekinesis, assumed she had misjudged the distance and took a sip. Ria's jaw dropped. Did you just... Did you just move her cup? She hissed violently, throwing a cushion at the empty air. You never move my cup. You complained for an hour when I asked you to pass me the television remote. You told me it interfered with your ectoplasmic alignment. Hush, Ria. You do not understand, Silas revered, holding up a spectral hand to silence her. She is navigating a profoundly complex subordinate clause regarding the existential dread of a dying sparrow. It is magnificent. She needs her nourishment uninterrupted. The muse is upon her. I will not allow a misplaced beverage to derail the next great British novel. And so began the darkest 48 hours of Ria's life. The defection. The pompous Victorian ghost who had threatened to haunt her ancestors for using the word impactful became Bella's personal spectral groupie. When Bella felt a draft, the window would miraculously slide shut. When the late afternoon sun glared on her screen, the blinds tilted themselves perfectly. When she sighed in frustration, the Spotify playlist mysteriously skipped to a soothing acoustic cello track. By day 3, Ria was spiralling into a deep, dark well of inadequacy. To cope with her flatmate's literary prodigy status and her ghost's treason, Ria reverted to the one thing she could control, her gig economy internet persona. She set up her ring light, faking a painfully energetic influencer voice for a thrift haul video about a moth-eaten cardigan with distressed grandpa energy. Silas drifted through the living room wall, shaking his head with profound, tragic disappointment. You peddle rags to the digital void, Ria. You curate a museum of digital lint, he sighed, a deep rattling sound from his chest, while in the next room, a modern-day Austen is crafting a masterpiece that will echo through the ages. You see the tragedy here, do you not? I had hoped to mentor a great mind. I tied my spiritual essence to your potential. Instead, I am witnessing what did you call it? A thrift haul. Shut up, Silas. Just shut up, Ria snapped, dropping the phone, her fake smile vanishing into real hurt. Not all of us have trust funds and a publishing deal at 21. Some of us have to pay for electricity. Some of us have to figure out how to monetize our own misery just to afford pasta. Art requires sacrifice, Ria, Silas shot back, his tone dripping with condescension. Bella understands this. Her prose bleeds upon the page. Her words have weight. Your prose... Well, currently, your prose does not exist. You must confront your own shallowness if you ever wish to achieve her depths. You hide behind these screens because you are afraid of the blank page. It was the ultimate insult. Silas wasn't just critiquing her writing anymore. He was critiquing her soul. Ria grabbed her coat, slammed the front door, and spent the next 4 hours walking aimlessly around the freezing, rain-soaked Gloucester docks, seriously wondering if it was too late to retrain as a lighthouse keeper. It was 2 a.m. when Ria finally returned, soaking wet and utterly defeated. The flat was mostly dark, save for a sharp, blue crack under the dining room door. As she peeled off her wet coat, she heard a sound. It wasn't the fluid, rapid-fire clacking of Bella's usual typing. It was a slow, deliberate tapping, followed by the distinct click of a mouse. Ria peeked through the crack in the door. Inside, Bella sat bathed in the sterile blue light of her screen, with Silas hovering right behind her in serene, devoted anticipation. But from Ria's angle, she could see the reflection of Bella's screen in the dark window pane. It wasn't a word processor. It was a chat window. "Make it longer," Bella whispered to herself, sounding bored as she typed into a small prompt box. "Write a highly evocative literary paragraph describing the feeling of profound isolation in a crowded room. Use metaphors relating to antique clocks and rotting fruit. Mimic the prose style of Virginia Woolf, but give it a modern, detached millennial tone. Generate." Bella hit enter. 3 seconds later, the screen began to populate with perfect, rapid-fire, flawlessly punctuated text rolling down the screen at superhuman speed. Bella didn't even read it fully. She highlighted the entire paragraph, hit copy, toggled over to her manuscript document, and hit paste. She leaned back, sipping her water, looking exceptionally pleased with her own hard work. In the doorway, Ria slapped a hand over her mouth to muffle a gasp. Behind Bella, Silas drifted closer to the screen. He peered at the black window. He looked at the little spinning circle that denoted the AI was thinking. The reflection of the chat GPT interface was clearly visible in his translucent, ghostly pupils. The temperature in the room plummeted 20 degrees in a single, terrifying second. The water in Bella's glass froze solid with a sharp crack, shattering the crystal. Silas's ghostly form began to expand. His usually calming blue aura shifted violently, boiling into a pulsating, terrifying crimson red. The air pressure in the room shifted so violently that Ria's ears popped. He grew in size, towering over the dining table as a vortex of Victorian fury. "A machine!" Silas bellowed, his voice echoing like an opening graveyard, rattling the teeth in Ria's skull. Bella jumped up, her chair clattering to the floor. She spun around, clutching her chest, her breath pluming in the icy air. Who said that? Ria? Is that you? Is this a prank?" Silas rose toward the ceiling, his tweed suit whipping around him as if caught in a Category 5 hurricane. He was no longer a spectral butler. He was a Class 5 apparition, fueled by the rage of 100 betrayed English teachers. "A clockwork golem, a digital parrot," Silas roared, the walls trembling. "You fed the sacred art of prose into a metallic calculator? You allowed a mathematical equation to mimic the human soul?" Oh my God, what is that? Ria, help!" Bella screamed, finally seeing the massive, red glowing outline of a man near the ceiling. The haunting began, and it was biblical. A localized tempest of wind howled indoors. A massive, heavy, hardback edition of the Oxford English Dictionary launched itself from the bookshelf, flying across the room and smashing into the wall inches from Bella's head, exploding into a confetti shower of pages. "Your syntax is stolen. Your metaphors are algorithmic regurgitation. You are no Bront. You are a plagiarist of the void," Silas echoed with righteous fury. The kitchen cabinet doors flew open, tearing off their hinges. Ria's collection of chipped mugs began to orbit the room like a ceramic asteroid belt, smashing into each other. A copy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein whipped past Bella's ear. "Mary Shelley warned us of this hubris. You have created a monster of ink and pixels." Silas gestured wildly at the flying book. "I'm sorry. My publisher needed 300 pages by Friday. It's called prompt engineering. The AI is just a tool." Bella sobbed, covering her head. "It's a valid collaborative tool for modern creators." "A tool for cowards with no soul. It is the death of the author. It is the assassination of art." Silas descended slightly, his face a mask of pure demonic rage, pointing a glowing crimson finger directly at her. "Leave this house. Remove your artificial inadequacy from my sight before I correct your punctuation with hellfire." The promise of hellfire over a misplaced comma broke Bella. She didn't pack. She grabbed her silver laptop, shrieked at a pitch that shattered the remaining light bulb, and bolted. She sprinted past Ria, tore the front door open, and fled into the Gloucester night, leaving her expensive luggage abandoned in the living room. The front door slammed shut. The howling wind stopped abruptly, and the flying mugs crashed to the floor. A heavy, ringing silence dropped back into the room. The terrifying red glow faded, replaced by the faint, miserable, flickering blue of a deeply, deeply embarrassed ghost. Ria walked into the wreckage of her living space, her wet trainers crunching on broken ceramic and scattered dictionary pages. Silas was sitting on the floor amidst the debris, looking incredibly small, his knees pulled to his chest, and his spectral head buried in his hands. Ria miraculously found an unbroken bottle of cheap Pinot Grigio and 2 mismatched glasses in the kitchen. She sat down on the floor beside Silas, poured a generous measure for herself, and set the empty glass down in front of him. "Drink up, Silas," Ria said softly without judgment. Silas lifted his head. He leaned forward and inhaled deeply, taking the fumes of the alcohol directly into his spectral essence. He coughed slightly, then let out a long, ragged, ghostly sigh. I was seduced, Ria. I was seduced by the promise of perfect grammar, he said, utterly devastated. I ignored the hollowness beneath the words because the commas were in the right place. I am a fool, a naive, archaic fool. You weren't to know, Silas. The AI is literally trained to sound like the things you love, Ria offered, taking a long sip. It read all the classics. It's designed to trick people like you. It's a very good mimic. But I should have known. I should have felt it. Silas shook his head mournfully. Her syntax was perfect, yes, but her soul was algorithmic. There was no pain in her prose, no actual struggle. Real writing is a battle, Ria. It is a war waged against a blank page, fought with the messy, imprecise weapons of human emotion. She bypassed the war entirely. She bought a victory she did not earn. Ria smiled faintly, bumping her shoulder playfully against his invisible one. You told me I was shallow, remember? You said my prose didn't exist. You liked the machine better than me. Silas winced, looking away, deeply ashamed. I was blinded by the luster of artificial intelligence and flawless punctuation. I apologize, Ria, profoundly and without reservation. You may struggle. You may write about depressing grey pastry and sad car boot sales. But at least the struggle is human. At least the words, however clumsy, are yours. I would rather spend eternity reading your honest, typo-ridden failures than another paragraph of her synthetic perfection. Ria felt a sudden, surprising wave of affection for the pompous 19th-century ghost who had been humbled by a language model. She reached over to Bella's abandoned luggage and pulled out a hardcover copy of Bella's first memoir. "Look at this cover," Ria said with a wicked glint in her eye, dropping it between them. Silas leaned in, inspecting the soft-focus black-and-white photo of Bella looking wistfully at a barren field. "The font is atrocious. It is entirely devoid of serifs," he sniffed, some of his old fire returning. "It screams, 'I summer in Tuscany, but I am terribly sad about the Wi-Fi connection.'" "Right? And look at the blurb. A devastatingly raw exploration of the millennial void," Ria laughed. "I bet you 10 quid she asked ChatGPT to write the void for her." "I wager she did not even specify the type of void. It is a generic, mass-produced abyss. A void off the rack." Silas smiled wickedly. "Let us open it. Read to me from the text. I wish to judge it with clear eyes." Ria flipped to a random page. "I stood on the deck of the yacht, the wind whispering of capitalism. My matcha was cold. The sea was a metaphor for my inability to commit to a skincare routine." Silas let out a bark of laughter that sounded like a rusty gate swinging open. "She used the word visceral 3 times in the prologue alone." "I counted them before you defected," Ria giggled. 3 times? In a single prologue? That is not writing, Ria. That is a crime against the English language. Silas gasped in genuine, performative horror. If one must be visceral, one should at least have the common decency to vary one's adjectives. Where is the editor? They sat there on the floor for a long time, drinking wine and inhaling fumes, bonding over the absolute, petty, vindictive joy of criticizing someone else's terrible book. Ria looked at the shattered glass and the ghostly snob sitting next to her. She didn't feel like a side character anymore. Her life was messy, and her mentor was a dead Victorian, but it was real. She picked up her phone from the floor, opened her notes app, and began to type. And this time, she didn't need AI to find the words. She just needed a little bit of spite, a little bit of wine, and a ghost who finally believed in her. Chapter 7. The Masterpiece and the Demolition. The attic apartment was a cave of creative despair, lit only by the harsh, radioactive blue glow of a laptop screen and a circle of empty coffee mugs that looked like a caffeine-summoning ritual gone wrong. The air was thick, smelling intensely of stale espresso, panic, instant noodles, dry shampoo, and the specific humidity of a room where someone had been sighing heavily for 6 hours straight. In the corner, the radiator clanked rhythmically, a metallic heartbeat counting down the seconds of wasted potential. Ria Khan was typing. She was not creating content tonight. Her massive ring light was unplugged and turned to face the wall like a shamed relative, while her phone lay face down on the floor, its battery entirely dead. A black brick of silence. Her hair was thrown into a messy bun that defied physics, held together by a pencil, a chopstick, and sheer willpower. She wore a hoodie that hadn't seen a washing machine in 3 days and was stained with what might be soup, might be tears, or might be the physical manifestation of writer's block. She typed furiously, the clack of the keys percussive and violent, like tiny bones breaking. Suddenly she stopped, staring at the screen with pure, unadulterated hatred before hitting the backspace aggressively and erasing a paragraph with the force of a jackhammer. She bit her lip until it was white. She looked tired, eyes rimmed with red, skin pale, but alive in a way she never did when holding a ring light and smiling for an algorithm. Silas stood in the corner, blending into the shadows. He was unusually quiet, watching her with an expression that was half pride, half dread. His hands clasped tightly behind his back to stop them from fidgeting. He floated exactly 1 inch above the floorboards to ensure absolute silence, terrified that a creaky floorboard might break the spell. By 2 a.m., Ria was pacing the small room like a caged tiger. She muttered dialogue to herself, testing the rhythm, gesturing wildly to an invisible audience. Stopping near the fruit bowl, she grabbed a browning banana and used it as a prop gun, aiming it directly at the wall. "You think you know loss? You don't know loss until you've lost the Wi-Fi password to your own soul," Ria whispered intensely to the plaster. She dropped her arm. "No, that's too melodrama. That's too CW. That sounds like a bad perfume ad. Less soap opera, more Scorsese." She paced again. "Grittier, maybe. Loss is just love with nowhere to go." "No, I saw that on a Pinterest board." Frustrated, she aggressively chewed the tip off her banana prop. By 2:45 a.m., Ria had abandoned pacing and was sitting entirely under her desk, hugging the table leg like a life raft in a storm of vowels. Silas peered under the desk, hanging upside down from the air, completely defying gravity. "Are we hiding from the verbs, Ria?" "The verbs are aggressive, Silas. They demand action," Ria whispered from the floor. "I just want to exist in the passive voice for a while. The mistake was made. By me. In choosing this career path. Can I write a novel entirely in emojis? Is that avant-garde or just lazy?" "It is the decline of civilization. Come out from under the furniture," Silas commanded. At 3:30 a.m., Ria was lying flat on the floor, staring at the ceiling, tracing the water stains with her eyes as if they were constellations mapping her failure. What is a synonym for sadness that isn't sadness? I've used sadness 3 times in 1 paragraph. It's repetitive, it's lazy, it's bad writing, it's offensive to the concept of sorrow. From the gloom, Silas's voice floated down, smooth as velvet. Melancholy, dolor, the heavy cloak of existence, the infinite grey, the ache of the unsaid, the weeping of the soul. "Too goth," Ria rejected. "What about the big sad?" "Please don't. If you type that, I will haunt your toaster," Silas threatened instantly. "I will burn every bagel you ever attempt to consume. I will make your toast taste of ash and failure. I will short-circuit the kettle." "Wistfulness?" she offered. "Wistfulness, yes," Silas agreed. "It implies a yearning for what is gone. It has texture. It tastes like cold tea and rain. Use that." By 4:15 a.m., Ria was doing jumping jacks while reciting the alphabet backward. Z, Y, X. Is xylophone a serious word? Can a murder weapon be a xylophone? "Only if the murderer is a clown," Silas deadpanned. "Focus, Ria. You are procrastinating through cardio." At 4:45 a.m., the breakdown finally hit. Ria sat at the keyboard, weeping silently while eating a dry digestive biscuit. Crumbs rained down between the keys, but she didn't bother to brush them away. "I am a fraud. I am a content creator playing dress-up," she cried softly. "I should just become a dental hygienist. Teeth are simple. Teeth don't require plot structure. Teeth just fall out and you get paid. Why did I think I could do this? Who gave me permission to have thoughts? I bet Shakespeare never cried into a biscuit. Shakespeare cried into ale, mostly, Silas assured her gently. And he complained endlessly about the lighting at the Globe, and the actors forgetting their lines, and the smell of the groundlings. You are in good company. Panic is the fuel of the artist. Without the panic, there is no art, only typing. At 5:15 a.m., manic energy returned with a vengeance. Ria typed so fast her fingers were an absolute blur, laughing maniacally at her own genius. And then he said, nothing. Yes, the power of silence. I am a genius. I am the god of this document. I control time. I control space. I control the weather. By 6 a.m., the birds started singing outside. A cheerful, mocking chorus that sounded exactly like they were laughing at her word count. The cold, grey light of the Gloucester dawn crept in through the window, exposing the dust and squalor of the room. Ria sat in the chair, her posture terrible, curved over the keyboard like a shrimp. She typed one final sentence. Her finger hovered over the period key. Tap. She stared at it as the cursor blinked steadily. Blink, blink, blink. It mocked her, daring her to continue. She hit enter. She slumped back in her chair, the springs squeaking so loudly in the silence it sounded like a gunshot in a library. It's done, she rasped, her voice cracking, hoarse and dry as dust. Silas drifted closer, moving like smoke. He didn't look at the glowing screen. He looked at her, studying the exhaustion etched into her face like a map of a war zone. You have reached the summit. The end? I actually wrote the end. And I didn't add an emoji after it, Ria marvelled. I didn't put link in bio. I didn't ask people to smash the like button or subscribe for part 2. It's just words, ending. It feels weird, like I lost a limb or gave birth to a very quiet paper baby. Congratulations, Ria, Silas said softly, a genuine note of awe in his voice. You have committed literature. You have pulled something from the ether, wrestled it to the ground and pinned it to the page like a butterfly. That is no small feat. Most people simply stare at the butterfly until it flies away. It might be terrible. It might be a dumpster fire of words, Ria panicked. It might be the worst thing ever written in the English language, including the user manual for my toaster and that text my ex sent breaking up with me. There is only one way to find out, Silas said. He gestured to the laptop with a solemnity usually reserved for coronations or executions. The deal hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. If it was good, if it had genuine merit, Silas would leave. He would cross over and become a memory. Later that morning, sunlight streamed through the dirty window, catching dust motes dancing in the air. The mood was funereal, but formal. The apartment felt charged with static electricity, the air humming with anticipation. Ria nervously tidied the desk, aligning the laptop perfectly parallel to the edge. She wiped a crumb off the trackpad with her sleeve. She moved a coffee cup 2 inches to the left, then 2 inches back, and finally decided the cup was an offence to art and hid it entirely under the table. She tried to flatten her hair with spit, giving up immediately when it sprang back up like a frightened cactus. Silas, meanwhile, was changing. He flickered, his form blurring like static on an old TV or a glitch in the Matrix. When he finally stabilised, his usual tweed suit was gone, replaced by a pristine spectral tuxedo with tails, a white bow tie, a silk cummerbund, and patent leather shoes that shone despite not being real. He slicked back his ghostly hair, checking his reflection in the turned-off TV screen, looking exactly like he was about to accept an Oscar in 1928. You dressed up. You're wearing tails? And is that a pocket watch? Ria asked, bewildered. One must meet one's destiny in appropriate attire. If I am to ascend to the great library in the sky, I shall do so looking sharp, Silas proclaimed. I will not meet Shakespeare, Joyce, or Woolf wearing tweed that smells of damp attic and regrets. I must make an impression. I have a bone to pick with Hemingway about his sentence structure, and I want to look authoritative when I do it. Ria looked down at her stained hoodie and pulled at a loose thread until it snapped. And I look like a goblin that lives under a bridge and eats moss. I look like I fought a raccoon and lost. I should change. I have a dress somewhere. Maybe the one I wore to that funeral 3 years ago. It's black. That's literary, right? Stop. You look like a writer, Ria, Silas said gently. Ink stains, exhaustion, questionable hygiene, and caffeine tremors are the uniform of the trade. You wear your suffering like a badge of honor. It suits you better than the ring light ever did. You look authentic. You look like someone who has been to the trenches of the imagination and survived. Ria blushed, hiding it by rubbing her tired eyes. Silas floated over to the chair. He didn't sit, but positioned himself to read, hovering with perfect posture, his hands resting on his knees, his chin held high. He summoned a pair of spectral reading glasses, wire-rimmed and highly dignified, that perched delicately on his nose. "Are you ready?" Silas asked. "Wait! No, I'm not," Ria hyperventilated, her panic rising. "Maybe I should run a spell check again. Maybe I used the word very too much. Silas, I think I used very 17 times in chapter 1, and I started 3 sentences with but. Isn't that illegal? Maybe I should change the protagonist's name to something more metaphorical, like sorrow or petrichor or silence. Silence went to the shops. Does that sound deep? Or does it sound like a perfume brand? Ria, it is finished. Do not fiddle. Fiddling is the death of art, Silas commanded. You are rearranging deck chairs on a ship that has already launched. The ink is dry, metaphorically speaking. The pixels are set. But what about the font? Is Times New Roman too basic? Should I switch to Garamond? Garamond says I am serious but approachable. Comic Sans says I am a psychopath. Leave the font alone. Okay, read it, Ria relented, backing away. But, Silas, if you hate it, lie to me. Please, just tell me it's nice. Tell me it has good vibes. Tell me it has commercial potential. Tell me it would make a great Netflix series starring someone hot. I can't handle the truth right now. If you destroy me, I will crumble into dust and you'll have to vacuum me up. A critic never lies, Ria. That is why we are so lonely, Silas told her firmly. To lie about art is to sin against the soul. Truth is the only kindness I can offer you now. Silas reached out. His translucent fingers hovered over the trackpad as he took a breath he didn't need. He scrolled to page 1. Silas read for hours. The sun moved across the floor, marking the passage of time like a sundial, shifting from the rug to the wall, turning the dust motes from silver to gold. Ria sat on the floor, hugging her knees and rocking slightly, watching his face. She searched for a twitch, a frown, a smile, a grimace. He was inscrutable, his face a mask of concentration. Occasionally, his eyes widened. Once, he touched his chest. Once, he paused to wipe away a spectral tear that evaporated before it hit the floor. As he read, something miraculous began to happen to the attic. The damp patch on the ceiling, the one shaped like a sad cloud that had dripped on Ria for 3 years, began to fade, drying up and shrinking to leave pristine white plaster. The peeling, nicotine-yellowed wallpaper smoothed itself out, and the pattern became vibrant again. Victorian flowers blooming in the gloom, their colours rich and deep in violets and blood-red roses. The cold grey light of Gloucester shifted, softening and warming into a golden amber glow, like the light in a cathedral or a very expensive whiskey advert. "Silas, do you feel that?" Ria whispered, her eyes wide as she looked around. The air changed, the smell of mildew, stale vape juice, and instant noodles vanished entirely, replaced by a rich, complex aroma. Old leather bindings, vanilla, beeswax, parchment, and expensive tobacco. It was the smell of a library that had existed for centuries. The sound of traffic outside faded, replaced by the hushed silence of a reading room, the crackle of a fire that wasn't there, and the distant turning of pages. Silas didn't look up. He was completely engrossed, turning the digital pages with a flick of his finger. He was smiling, not his usual smug smirk, but a real smile of wonder and recognition. The room, it's getting warm, Ria noted. It actually feels safe. It feels like home. Silas read faster now, devouring the words. The golden glow intensified, radiating from him and illuminating the dust motes. Outside, the neon, cloudy with a chance of vape sign seemed to dim, its vulgarity completely overpowered by the holy light filling the room. Spectral bookshelves appeared on the walls, where there was once only damp plaster, rising to the ceiling and filled with leather-bound volumes whose spines gleamed with gold leaf. He was crossing over. The sheer merit of Ria's work was unlocking the door that had been closed to him for 100 years. Ria stood up on numb legs, feeling the warmth on her face like she was opening an oven door. It's working, isn't it? It's actually good. It's real. I did it. I actually wrote something real. Silas reached the final chapter. He looked younger, the lines of bitterness and judgment on his face smoothing away completely. He looked peaceful, exactly like the man he was meant to be, before he died angry at a split infinitive. The prose. It sings, it has rhythm, it has truth, it hurts in the right way, Silas whispered to himself, his voice echoing beautifully. Ria took a step back, the reality hitting her like a physical blow. He's going. She looked around the attic. Without him, the magic would vanish. It would become just a cold box where she lived alone. She would have no one to correct her grammar, no one to judge her TikToks, no one to talk to at 3 a.m. about the existential dread of being alive. No one to remember her. Silas, she murmured. He was at the last page. He raised his hand as if reaching for a door handle made of pure light that had appeared in the air. The glow was blinding now, accompanied by a low, beautiful, terrifying hum, like a choir tuning up, or the sound of 1,000 pages turning at once, vibrating right in Ria's teeth. Silas finished the final sentence. He closed his eyes, inhaling the success, vibrating with the weightless energy of release. He looked up at Ria, expecting to see triumph, or a high five, or a slay queen. Instead, he saw a girl in a stained hoodie looking smaller than he had ever seen her. She looked terrified, not of ghosts, but of the silence that was coming. She looked like a child left behind at a train station. The spectral bookshelves flickered, and for a second, Ria looked completely alone in the center of the room. It's trash, isn't it? Tell me it's trash, please. Tell me it's unreadable garbage, Ria pleaded, her voice shaking as tears spilled over. Tell me I should burn it. Silas paused. The door to the afterlife was open. He could feel the peace waiting for him. No more damp, no more noise, no more vape shops or influencers. Just rest. Just books. Just silence. He could hear the faint rustle of pages from the other side and smell the ink of the great library. He looked at Ria. She was trembling, looking at the empty chair where he usually floated, already grieving his absence. I think I used too many adverbs in chapter 5, and the ending is rushed, she babbled, desperate self-sabotage taking over. I should delete it. I need to delete it right now. Yeah, she lunged for the laptop, grabbing the mouse with a violently shaking hand. Let me delete it. It needs a rewrite. It needs a total overhaul. I can't let you read this garbage. It's not ready. I'm not ready. Silas stopped her with a sharp, commanding gesture. He put his hand over hers. She couldn't feel it, but the air grew freezing cold around her fingers, stopping her movement instantly. Hush, Silas said. He looked at the laptop. The words, "The End," glowed on the screen. It was a masterpiece. It was his ticket home. Then he looked at the open door of light beckoning him. Then he looked back at Ria. He saw the loneliness in her eyes, perfectly mirroring the loneliness he had felt for 100 years in this very room. He saw a girl who had finally found her voice, but was about to lose her only listener. He realized that crossing over meant leaving her in the dark. He made a choice, the hardest choice of his afterlife. Silas reached out and closed the laptop lid. Snap. The sound was final, like a guillotine blade dropping. "You are correct," Silas lied smoothly. The hum stopped instantly. The golden glow flickered and died like a blown-out candle. The spectral bookshelves dissolved into mist. The damp patch reappeared on the ceiling, spreading like a bruise, and the smell of the library vanished, replaced instantly by the scent of Febreze, rain, and cold reality. Ria blinked, stunned, as the biting cold rushed back into the room. What? Silas stood up. His magnificent tuxedo faded, melting back into his worn tweed suit, and the patent leather shoes dulled into scuffed brown leather. He adjusted his cuffs to hide his shaking hands, turning his back to the light that was no longer there. The pacing in Chapter 3 is sluggish. It drags like a wounded badger through mud. It is laborious. It made me want to nap, Silas proclaimed. It does? Ria asked. And the dialogue. Pedestrian. At one point, the protagonist says, "It is what it is." That is a tautology, Ria. It is lazy. It is unworthy of me. It is unworthy of literature. It is the language of people who have given up on thinking, he critiqued. But the glow, the library smell, the choir, Ria pressed. Silas waved a hand dismissively, keeping his voice tight and refusing to look at her. Atmospheric pressure. A trick of the light. Probably a gas leak from downstairs. Do not flatter yourself. Hallucinations are common in the sleep-deprived. You saw what you wanted to see. You projected your desire for validation onto the architecture. So, it's not good enough? You're not leaving? You're stuck here? It shows promise. But it is not a masterpiece, and I accept nothing less than a masterpiece. I will not cross over on the back of a mediocrity, Silas declared, floating toward the window so she couldn't see his face. He looked devastated, heartbroken, like a man who had just closed the door on paradise and swallowed the key. But he stayed. I have standards to maintain, even in death. I will not arrive in the afterlife embarrassed by your dangling participles. They would laugh me out of the cloud. We shall start the second draft tomorrow. We shall ruthlessly edit. We shall cut the adverbs until they bleed. Ria stared at his back. She knew he was lying. She had seen the glow. She had felt the truth in the room. She wiped a tear from her cheek, a relief washing over her so strongly it almost knocked her over. "Okay," Ria said softly. "Second draft. Tomorrow. We'll fix the pacing. We'll fix everything." "And Ria?" Silas called out. "Yeah? Perhaps. Keep the 'it is what it is.' It has a certain modern charm. It captures the futility of existence quite well." Night fell again, restoring the status quo. Ria fell asleep on the sofa, utterly exhausted, clutching a cushion like a lifeline. She was snoring softly, a small human sound in the quiet room. Silas watched over her. He held his copy of Twilight, but he wasn't reading it. He was just holding it, grateful for the solidity of the book, grateful for the company, and grateful for the noise of her breathing. He floated over to the laptop and opened it quietly. He touched the screen just for a second, his spectral finger tracing the words, "The End." "It was perfect," Silas whispered to the empty room, tears in his eyes. "It was the best thing I have ever read. It was magnificent." He closed the laptop gently. Suddenly, there was a sound at the door. Slide. A thick, official envelope was pushed underneath the doorframe. The red lettering screamed danger. Silas frowned. Drifting over to inspect it, the air around him grew cold. Gloucester City Council. Urgent notice of demolition. Silas read the text straight through the paper with his ghost powers, his eyes widening in absolute horror. Notice to vacate. Building condemned. Structural instability. Demolition. Scheduled in 30 days. Silas looked at the sleeping Ria, dreaming of her second draft, and then back at the letter. The piece of the manuscript was gone, replaced instantly by panic. He had given up heaven for this? To be homeless? To be a ghost without a haunt? To lose the one person in the world who could see him? "Oh, bugger," Silas cursed softly. He looked out the window. Across the street, The cloudy with a chance of vape sign flickered ominously. Red, dark, like a countdown clock ticking away their time. Epilogue. The Wrecking Ball and the Plague Bell. The morning after a masterpiece is written should theoretically involve champagne, a profound sense of inner peace, and perhaps a lie-in. Ria Khan's morning involved none of these things. Instead, she woke up on her sofa, clutching a cushion like a life raft, to find Silas hovering over her. He wore the grim, panicked expression of a Victorian undertaker who had just run out of coffins. "Silas," Ria mumbled, groggy and disoriented. "What time is it? Did I dream the glowing library? Did we finish the draft?" "We finished the draft, Ria. It was adequate," Silas replied, his diction crisp and urgent. "However, literature has been temporarily postponed due to the imminent destruction of our physical reality. Read the parchment." He gestured dramatically with a translucent finger toward a thick, official-looking envelope resting on the coffee table. The bold red lettering screamed danger. Ria sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and pulled out the letter. "Gloucester City Council," she read, her voice rising in panic. "Urgent notice of demolition, building condemned, structural instability, demolition scheduled in 30 days. Silas, they're knocking down the flat." "Indeed," Silas said, floating agitatedly near the ceiling. "It appears my sacrifice of the eternal, peaceful afterlife in the great library has been rewarded with an eviction notice from the Gloucester bureaucracy. If this building falls, I become a wandering spectre. I refuse to haunt a Costa Coffee, Ria. I refuse." Before Ria could fully process the reality of impending homelessness, the front door didn't just open, it was shoved inward by the unstoppable force of nature known as Mrs. Pigeon. The landlady marched in, clutching her own red envelope like a weapon. Close behind her trailed Baz, wearing a hustle-hard t-shirt and filming the entire chaotic morning on his phone gimbal. "Right, listen up, you spectral ponce," Mrs. Pigeon shouted into the general centre of the room, missing Silas completely. "I know you're in here." "I am to your left, madam, and I am not a ponce," Silas said indignantly, adjusting his tweed cravat. "We have been over this. I know you cannot see me, but I demand basic spatial awareness." "I don't care if you're quoting Shakespeare or sulking in the skirting boards," Mrs. Pigeon yelled at an empty patch of wallpaper. "They want to knock us down to build luxury flats for people who eat avocado on toast. We are forming a resistance." Baz panned his camera around the room. "Mrs. P, this is Content Gold. Local landlady fights evil developers. We need to get this on TikTok, a Save the Flat hashtag." Suddenly, Baz shivered, rubbing his arms. "Whoa, did it just get frosty in here? Ria, I can't see anything at all, but is the ghost guy judging me?" "Yes, Baz. Silas is judging you. Being the only one here with the sight is exhausting." Ria sighed, pacing the floorboards. "But he's mostly judging the city council. How do we stop a demolition? We have 30 days. Silas sniffed dismissively. "In my day, if one wished to stop a public works project, one simply challenged the mayor to a duel at dawn or bribed a magistrate. Have you a dueling pistol, Ria?" "We need a petition. Or a lawyer," Ria muttered, ignoring him. Her eyes suddenly lit up. "Wait. A historical preservation order. If we can prove the building has significant historical value, they can't tear it down." Mrs. Pigeon squinted aggressively at a floor lamp, assuming it was Silas. "Historical value? The only history in this building is the mold in the downstairs bathroom. Unless your see-through roommate over there is famous?" "I am a poet of considerable, albeit unpublished, merit." Silas gasped, deeply offended. "Silas is from the 19th century, but he's not documented," Ria explained. "We need something older, something physically tied to the building's foundations." A heavy, damp silence fell over the room. Silas's eyes widened. He slowly turned his gaze downward, staring right through the floorboards. "Ria," Silas said quietly with deep dread. "There is one older. Much older. But he is unpleasant. He lacks all conversational grace and smells distinctively of despair and raw onion." "Who?" "The resident of Flat 3B, Bartholomew. He has been here since the Great Plague of 1665. 10 minutes later, the newly formed Resistance Council stood outside the door of Flat 3B. It was the only door in the building that was permanently locked, its wood blackened and warped with age. "Okay, the vibes out here are rancid," Baz whispered, holding his phone up. "It smells like a wet dog that died in a swamp. I literally can't see any ghosts, but are we sure we want to do this?" "We have to," Ria said, holding her breath against the smell. "Silas, tell him to come out." Silas cleared his throat and spoke to the wood. "Bartholomew, it is Silas Thorne and the mortals. We require your assistance." The temperature in the hallway plummeted, blooming frost across Baz's phone screen. Through the dark wood of the door seeped a thick, greenish-grey mist. It coalesced into a figure wearing a tattered, muddy tunic, clutching a heavy wooden handbell. Bartholomew's face was covered in spectral boils, and his expression was one of profound, eternal exhaustion. "Bring out your dead," Bartholomew intoned, his voice wet and echoing like mud slopping into a bucket. He let out a heavy sigh. "Just kidding. There are no dead. Only me." "What do you want, Victorian? I was napping. I've been napping since the fire of London." "Hi, Bartholomew. I'm Ria," she said politely. "We need your help. The council wants to knock the building down." Bartholomew weakly rang his bell. Clang, clang. "Let them. Everything turns to dust. The rats take it all in the end." "Listen here, you walking biohazard," Mrs. Pigeon shouted at the ceiling. "If they knock this place down, you're going with it. Do you want to spend eternity haunting a modern, open-plan kitchen with a kitchen island?" Bartholomew frowned, looking at the landlady. "Ah, Mrs. Pigeon is shouting at the light fixture again. Doesn't she know I am right in front of her?" "She lacks the sight, as we are both well aware," Silas interjected. "Bartholomew, if we can prove you died here in 1665, we can claim the land is a plague pit of historical significance. We need you to haunt the city council." "Haunt the council? That requires energy. I haven't had a hot meal in 400 years. Besides, I am bound to the floorboards of 3B. I cannot leave." Ria's eyes lit up as she remembered the disastrous trip to Cheddar Gorge. "Wait. Silas is bound to my flat, but when I took my laptop, the tether pulled him with me." "Bartholomew, what's your tether? What's your anchor to the physical world?" Reaching into his tunic, the plague ghost pulled out a filthy, ancient wooden spoon. "My lucky porridge spoon. The buboes took me before I could finish my breakfast. It is my eternal regret." "Okay, gross," Baz gagged. "But wait. If we take the cursed spoon to the council office, the plague ghost gets dragged with it, like ghost Bluetooth?" "The youth is surprisingly astute, despite his butchery of the English language," Silas sighed. "Yes, Ria. We must take the spoon to the municipal building." And so, the worst field trip in the history of Gloucester was assembled. Ria slung her canvas tote bag over her shoulder, securely housing her laptop, and by extension, Silas. With a pair of kitchen tongs, Mrs. Pigeon delicately picked up Bartholomew's ghostly porridge spoon and dropped it into a plastic Tupperware container. The Gloucester City Council Planning Office was a beige monument to bureaucracy. It smelled of stale coffee and administrative apathy. Behind the reception desk sat Susan, a clerk who looked like she hadn't smiled since 2008. "Take a ticket and wait for your number to be called," Susan said, bored, not looking up from her screen. "We don't have time for a ticket," Ria insisted. "We're here to file an emergency historical preservation injunction for 42 Cooper's Road. It's a verified 17th century plague site." "Do you have an archaeological survey? A signed affidavit from a historian?" Susan drawled. Mrs. Pigeon slammed her hands on the desk. "I have a ghost with boils in a Tupperware box, Susan. Now get the head of planning out here before I let him loose on the stationery cupboard." Invisible to the clerk and to Baz, absolute chaos was unfolding in the waiting area. Silas hovered near the water cooler, deeply offended by the mid-century modern architecture. Bartholomew, meanwhile, was being dragged mercilessly by the tether connected to the Tupperware in Mrs. Pigeon's hands. The velocity, Bartholomew groaned, floating entirely sideways. It makes my humours unbalanced. I feel as though I am on a terrible carriage ride to hell. Oh, do stop whining, Bartholomew, Silas sneered. Try being stuffed into a woven hemp dungeon while travelling at 40 miles an hour in a bruised plum of a motor car. Baz shoved his phone toward the glass partition. Look, Susan, if you don't call the boss down, this is going live to my 3,000 followers. Cancel culture comes for the council. Finally, looking up, Susan's eyes narrowed. Security. Okay, plan B, Ria panicked. Bartholomew, do something. Haunt them. Prove you're here. Bartholomew sighed. A wet, rattling exhale that dropped the temperature of the municipal office to below freezing. The water in the cooler instantly turned to solid ice, shattering the plastic jug. Frost crept across the beige walls like spiderwebs. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, bathing the room in a sickly 17th century green. Then came the deafening, terrifying toll of the heavy wooden bell. Clang, clang, clang. Woe upon this house of parchment and ink! Bartholomew's voice boomed, vibrating the reinforced glass windows. The plague claims all. Susan screamed as official planning documents flew into the air, caught in a freezing, spectral vortex. Baz cheered, keeping his camera perfectly steady on the flying papers and flickering lights, completely oblivious to the horrifying plague victim at the centre of the storm. A bit theatrical for my tastes, but effective, Silas muttered to Ria, crossing his arms with mild professional jealousy. He certainly knows his demographic. Are you going to cancel the demolition, Susan? Ria yelled over the howling wind. I'll print the injunction forms. Just make it stop. The clerk sobbed, cowering under her desk. With a sharp click, Mrs. Pigeon snapped the lid securely onto the Tupperware container. The freezing wind died instantly. The papers fluttered to the floor, and the lights returned to a boring, buzzing, fluorescent hum. Bartholomew dropped to the linoleum, panting. I need a lie down, he wheezed weakly. That took 4 centuries of energy. 20 minutes later, they stood outside the city council building. The afternoon sun felt incredibly warm after the spectral chill. In her hand, Ria held a stamped official document. A temporary stay of execution, she exhaled, letting out a long, shaking breath. 30 days to get a proper historian down to the flat to verify the plague pit, or the wrecking balls come back. The video is blowing up, Baz said, typing furiously on his phone. Poltergeist in planning office. We're trending, Ria. I might not be able to see him, but we can definitely monetize his floating papers. We have bought ourselves a month, Ria, Silas said softly, floating gracefully next to her in the sunlight. A month to write our way out of this, to prove our worth to a world that wishes to pave over our history. Mrs. Pigeon shouted at a nearby parking meter. You did good, Boyle boy. Now get back in your box, we're stopping at Greg's on the way home. Ria looked down at the piece of paper and then up at her bizarre, chaotic found family. A Victorian snob, a plague victim, a terrifying landlady, and a social media manager. She smiled, sliding her laptop and Silas's tether safely back into her tote bag. Right, let's go home, Ria said. We've got a second draft to edit and a building to save. Indeed, Silas smiled back, the anxiety of the morning fading from his spectral features. The masterpiece awaits, and I vehemently refuse to be evicted before I see it published. As they walked away down the Gloucester street, the faint, muffled sound of a bell rang out from Mrs. Pigeon's Tupperware container, a small, ghostly note of victory against the indifferent stone of the world.